The waterfall was louder than Marlene had expected, loud enough to shake loose thoughts she had been holding in place for weeks. She stood on the downstream side of it in the cold blue light of early morning, one hand locked around the rail of a narrow plank footbridge. 2 days of rain had darkened every rock and swollen the creek until white water dropped 35 feet into a basin of spray. Her brown boots slipped half an inch on the wet boards. Her left knee answered with a hot little warning. Marlene tightened her grip, reached into the dripping rhododendron with her other hand, and pulled the leaves aside. That was when she saw the cabin. It stood beyond the bright curtain of water, not beneath it but farther upstream on the higher east bank, perhaps 60 feet away. Dark chestnut logs, a stone chimney, a porch sagging just enough to make promises dangerous. Copper leaves clung to the roof, and mist moved between the trees, as if the mountain had been keeping the place to itself. For one strange second, Marlene thought of the farmhouse kitchen she had been ordered to leave, the room whose floor she had scrubbed, whose bills she had paid, whose leaking pipes she had crawled beneath at 59 with a flashlight between her teeth. Then the cabin sharpened through the spray. She leaned forward in her faded teal raincoat and whispered, "Raymond, what did you do?" 3 weeks earlier, Derek Hayes had sat in that farmhouse kitchen and eaten the last biscuit Marlene would ever bake there. He split it with his thumbs while she stood at the sink, rinsing Thomas's coffee mug. The mug had a faded red apple painted on one side and a hairline crack near the handle. Thomas had used it every morning for 27 years, even after Marlene pointed out that hot coffee could finish the crack and send the whole thing into his lap. "Then I'll have a memorable morning," he had said. Thomas had been dead 11 days. The funeral flowers were browning on the dining room sideboard. Somebody had sent lilies so strongly scented that Marlene had moved them into the laundry room, where they now competed with detergent and the damp wool smell of Thomas's old field jacket. She had not decided what to do with the jacket. She had not decided what to do with anything. Derek brushed crumbs from his fingers onto his empty plate. "Did Dad ever talk to you about the trust?" Marlene turned off the faucet. "He talked about irrigation until I threatened to poison him. You'll have to be more specific." Ordinarily, that would have earned at least half a smile. Derek had always enjoyed her dry remarks when they weren't aimed at him. That morning, his face remained arranged in the solemn expression he had worn through the funeral, as if grief were a meeting he intended to chair. Ellen sat across from him with both hands around a cup of coffee she had not tasted. At 51, she had Thomas's long nose and his habit of pressing her lips together before saying something difficult. She had been pressing them together for most of the morning. "The farm trust," Derek said. "The one Granddad set up." Marlene dried her hands on a dish towel. "What about it?" Derek glanced at Ellen, but Ellen studied the coffee. "The property transferred into it before Dad married you. The acreage, the farmhouse, the packing shed, all of it." Marlene waited for the rest. When it did not come, she pulled out the chair at the end of the table and sat. The chair gave its familiar squeak. She had been meaning to tighten the left rear brace since August. "Thomas told me the farm would pass to you two," she said. "That was never a secret." "No. But I'm not sure he explained that the trust owns it now, not his estate." Marlene looked at the biscuit crumbs on Derek's plate. One had landed in the smear of blackberry jam she'd opened because it was his favorite. "And what exactly are you telling me?" Derek's shoulders rose and fell. He wore a navy pullover that looked too clean for the farm. "I'm telling you Ellen and I are the trustees, and we have decisions to make before pruning season. Pruning starts in February. It starts with planning before February. I know when pruning starts, Derek." That reached him. His eyes lifted, irritation flashing before concern covered it. Ellen finally spoke. "Marlene, maybe we should all take a breath. I am breathing. You know what I mean." She did. Ellen meant that Marlene should soften the moment enough for everyone else to survive it. Derek folded his napkin into a narrow rectangle. "We're not trying to be cruel." People rarely announce that unless cruelty had already found a chair. Marlene glanced toward the window over the sink. Beyond it, rows of apple trees ran down the slope in damp gray lines. She knew which low hollow collected frost, which section needed lime, which hydrant froze first. She knew that the third tree in the first winesap row had a split crotch that would fail under a heavy crop if it wasn't braced. Thomas had forgotten it twice. She had not. "How long?" she asked. Derek stared at her. For what? To leave. Ellen's cup touched the saucer too hard. Derek looked almost relieved that Marlene had dragged the sentence into the room for him. "We thought 60 days. We? Ellen and I have discussed it." Ellen's cheeks reddened, only generally. 60 days, Marlene repeated. "There are insurance issues, operational issues. If we lease the house separately from the orchard, I live in the house. I understand that." "No, you understand the sentence." "I'm not sure you understand the fact." Derek pushed his plate away. "Marlene, nobody is denying that you lived here with Dad." She watched him choose the past tense. "I kept the books for this farm." "Yes, I did payroll, vendor accounts, equipment logs. I know you helped. I rebuilt the spray schedule after the co-op changed the reporting rules. I found the leak that was emptying the upper cistern. I negotiated the loan on the cold storage unit because your father thought an adjustable rate sounded friendly." Derek rubbed one palm over the other. "And you were married. Couples help each other." From Ellen's direction came a small breath, nearly a word, and then not one. Marlene turned to her. "Do you agree?" Ellen looked older than she had at the funeral. "I think Derek means there's no separate employment record. That isn't what I asked." "Marlene, do you agree that I merely helped Thomas?" Ellen's eyes moved toward the windows, the counters, the old pine cabinet Marlene had stripped and refinished during a winter, when the farm could not afford new kitchen doors. "I know how much you did," she said quietly. Derek shifted in his chair. "That's not the legal question." Marlene looked back at Ellen. "Do you agree?" Ellen did not answer. The refrigerator motor came on. Somewhere in the mudroom, the washing machine advanced with a heavy click. Marlene had put Thomas's sheets in before breakfast, then forgotten she had done it. She stood carefully because her knee had stiffened under the table. "All right," she said. Ellen's forehead creased. "What does that mean?" "It means I heard you." "Marlene, we should talk through what you need," Derek said. "There may be furniture you can take. Personal items. We're not looking to put you out on the road." "How generous." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying." "No, you're managing." "That's unfair." "Then you should be comfortable." Unfairness seems to have become an operational issue. She walked into the mudroom before either of them could answer. Thomas's work jacket hung from its peg beside her raincoat, one sleeve turned inward. She reached automatically to straighten it, then stopped with her fingers an inch away. Behind her, Ellen said, "She just lost him, Derek." Her voice was low, but the old house carried sound. Marlene had learned that during the years when Thomas and Derek argued in the kitchen and both assumed she could not hear them from the pantry. "So did we," Derek said. "I know. We can't freeze everything because she's upset." "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" Nothing followed. Marlene opened the washing machine. Steam and the clean smell of soap rose around her. She lifted one of Thomas's pillowcases, twisted it hard between both hands, and watched the water fall back into the drum. During the next 9 days, she learned the weight of her own life. Her clothes and account books fit into cardboard produce boxes. Her hand tools filled 2 metal chests. The walnut dresser had belonged to her mother, but the dining table had come with the farmhouse, though Marlene had sanded cigarette burns from it and rubbed the wood with oil every spring. She left it. She left the braided rug she had made from worn farm shirts because it fit the room better than it would fit anywhere else. She left the apple press because Derek said it was farm equipment. She left the blue bedroom curtains because Ellen had once admired them, and Marlene could not bear the ugliness of removing every trace. Derek stayed away while she packed. He texted twice about forwarding mail and once to ask where Thomas had kept the diesel receipts. Marlene replied, bottom drawer of the gray filing cabinet sorted by quarter. Then she hated herself for answering, though not enough to wish she hadn't. The receipts mattered to people who had sold fuel in good faith. Competence was a hard habit to abandon, just because it had been mistaken for obedience. Ellen came on the fourth afternoon with packing tape and 2 sandwiches from the diner. She stood in the bedroom doorway while Marlene wrapped the coffee mug with the red apple. "You're taking that?" Ellen asked. "Yes. I thought maybe Derek would want it." "He can ask." Ellen set the sandwiches on the dresser. "He doesn't know how to do this. Remove a woman from her home, handle Dad being gone." Marlene folded another layer of newspaper around the mug. "Neither do I. I'm not defending him." "You're not opposing him." Ellen flinched as if the words had arrived louder than Marlene had spoken them. For a moment, Marlene almost reached for her. Ellen had been 19 when Thomas brought her home from college for the first time, all sharp opinions and bitten fingernails. She had never needed another mother, and Marlene had never claimed to be one. But over the years, Marlene had sat beside her in emergency rooms, corrected her tax returns, and once driven 5 hours through sleet because Ellen's marriage had ended and she could not stand the sound of her own apartment. Now Ellen lifted one roll of tape and turned it in her hands. "I'm sorry," she said. Marlene placed the wrapped mug in the box. "I believe you." Ellen waited. Marlene did not add that belief was enough. On the morning she left, rain hung in the air without falling. Her aging station wagon sagged under boxes, tools, 2 lamps, and the walnut dresser tied inside with the hatch partly open. She had rented a furnished room for 1 month from a retired nurse outside Asheville. Beyond that, her plan consisted of Social Security, a thin savings account, and the certainty that she could still add columns faster than most people could create them. Derek arrived as she fastened the last strap. "You should let me check that," he said. "It's secure. The dresser could shift. It won't." He stood beside the car, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Without the kitchen table between them, he looked uncertain and younger, though he was 54. "I didn't want it to happen like this," he said. Marlene pulled on her faded teal raincoat. "How did you want it to happen?" He had no answer ready. She climbed behind the wheel. Her knee protested, and she waited for the ache to settle before closing the door. Ellen stood on the porch. Derek remained near the rear bumper. Neither waved as Marlene drove past the packing shed, the cold storage building, and the first rows of trees she had helped plant 32 years before. At the county road, her phone began ringing in the cup holder. She nearly ignored it. Then she saw the unfamiliar number and thought it might be the woman renting the room. "Hello?" a man's voice asked. "Is this Marlene Hayes, sister of Raymond Cole?" Marlene kept one hand on the wheel. She had not heard her brother's name spoken aloud in almost 6 years. "Yes," she said. "What happened?" "I'm sorry to tell you this, Mrs. Hayes, but your brother died on Tuesday." The station wagon drifted toward the shoulder. Marlene corrected too sharply, and something in the back gave a hollow wooden knock. The dresser. She eased onto a strip of gravel beside the road and put the car in park. The man kept speaking, identifying himself as Martin Penland, an attorney in Spruce Pine who had done occasional work for Raymond. His voice had the patient steadiness of someone accustomed to delivering facts after the facts had become useless. "Was he sick?" Marlene asked. "Not that I knew. His neighbor found him at home. The medical examiner believes it was his heart." "At home where?" There was a pause. "Did you not have his current address?" I asked where. Martin gave her the name of a road outside town. It meant nothing to her. Rain ticked once against the windshield, a handful of drops thrown from a passing cloud. Derek had come to the end of the driveway. He stood there watching her car from a distance, perhaps wondering whether the dresser had shifted, perhaps wondering whether she was crying. She wasn't. "When is the service?" she asked. Raymond left instructions for cremation, but no instructions for a service. "I understand you're his only surviving relative." "Apparently." Martin let that answer sit. "There are some things we need to discuss when you're able," he said. Nothing urgent today. I'm already packed. I'm sorry? Marlene watched Derek turn back toward the farm. Never mind, I can come tomorrow. The furnished room belonged to a retired nurse named Louise Carver, who wore silver rings on every finger and had painted her front door yellow because, as she explained, beige is what happens when a color loses its nerve. The room was above Louise's detached garage, with a sloped ceiling, a hot plate, and a shower, narrow enough to punish anyone who dropped the soap. Louise helped Marlene wrestle the walnut dresser up the stairs, refusing all warnings about her back. I spent 37 years moving men twice my size from beds to wheelchairs, she said. A dead woman's dresser doesn't scare me. She's been dead since 1989. Then she's not likely to complain about our technique. They got it halfway through the doorway before discovering the angle was wrong. Marlene began to laugh. It arrived without permission and hurt so badly that she had to lean her forehead against the dresser. Louise waited beside her, breathing hard. "This the kind of laugh where I join in?" she asked, "or the kind where I find tissues?" "I don't know yet." "Fair enough." By the time the dresser stood beneath the single window, Marlene's knee was throbbing. She unpacked the cracked apple mug, set it on top, and placed Thomas's folded field jacket in the bottom drawer. She'd taken it after all. The next morning, she drove north with Martin Penland's directions printed on paper, because her phone had a habit of losing its signal precisely when she needed it most. His office occupied half of a converted bungalow between a tire shop and a church thrift store. Martin was a broad man in his early 60s with a mustache that looked permanently surprised. He made coffee in a machine that hissed like an offended cat. Raymond hated this coffee, he said. Then he had one good opinion left. Martin smiled, then handed her a plain folder. There was no final letter from her brother, no carefully prepared explanation. Raymond had died without a will and with an electricity bill clipped to his refrigerator by a magnet, shaped like a trout. The money in his checking account would go toward cremation, medical expenses, taxes, and the other ordinary debts that continued sending envelopes after a man stopped opening them. He rented the house where he was living, Martin said. The landlord is giving us until the end of the month to clear his belongings. Us? His estate. Which, unless someone unknown steps forward, means you'll have decisions to make. Marlene ran her finger down a list of accounts. Raymond had never been rich, but she had not imagined his life reduced to 5 typed lines and a balance small enough to fit on a grocery receipt. You said there were things to discuss. There's land. She looked up. 19 acres, mountain tract, undeveloped according to the county record. He kept the taxes current. Why? Martin's eyebrows moved under the startled mustache. Why did he keep them current? Why did he have 19 acres? I assumed you knew. I haven't spoken to Raymond in 6 years. Martin sat back. He did not ask why, which made her more aware that an explanation existed. Then I'm afraid I can't tell you much beyond the record, he said. The tract came to him a long time ago. It isn't listed for agricultural use, and there's no conventional driveway. The assessed value is modest. How modest? He told her. It was more than nothing and much less than rescue. If she sold it, taxes and costs would reduce the figure further. If a buyer could be found. Steep land without convenient access did not attract people who preferred their wilderness within range of grocery delivery. Under intestate succession, you appear to be the heir, Martin said. Probate still has to proceed. Creditors get their notice. The estate pays what it can. I don't want you making plans around an asset you haven't seen. What kind of plans? Any plans. Marlene closed the folder. You sound like a man who has watched people build houses on land they didn't own yet. Once, on land somebody else owned. I developed the mustache shortly afterward. Despite herself, she smiled. Raymond's rented house smelled of dust, bacon grease, and the cedar blocks he had tucked into every closet. He had lived in 4 rooms with 1 good chair, 7 bad lamps, and enough fishing lures to stock a sporting goods counter. Marlene stood inside his bedroom while Martin dealt with the landlord in the front room. Shirts hung in a row, mostly plaid. each buttoned at the collar as though waiting for inspection. Raymond had always buttoned shirts before hanging them. When they were young, she had teased him that the sleeves might escape. She opened the bedside drawer, reading glasses, antacid tablets, a pocket knife. No message. She'd not expected one, but expectation was a dishonest thing. It could put on a different coat and follow you anywhere. In the kitchen, a ceramic bowl held receipts, loose screws, and 3 keys. One key had a paper tag tied to it with string. The writing had faded until only 2 letters remained. Marlene held it out to Martin. Land? Could be lawnmower. He didn't own a lawnmower. There's more moss outside than grass. They found a flat metal cash box beneath the bed. It was unlocked. Inside were property tax bills, a survey copy nearly 30 years old, and hardware receipts from stores in 3 different mountain towns. Roofing nails, copper flashing, stove cement, pipe fittings. The oldest receipts had yellowed at the edges. The newest was 14 months old. This doesn't look undeveloped, Marlene said. Martin examined the survey. County descriptions can lag behind reality, particularly up a mountain. Can I go there? As prospective heir and estate representative, you can inspect it. I'd prefer you wait until we verify access, so I don't build a house on the neighbor's property, so I don't have to grow a second mustache. He gave her the survey copy and the key, after noting both in his file. That evening, rain settled over Louise's yellow door and stayed. Marlene sat at the little table above the garage with Raymond's receipts arranged by year. Sorting them was unnecessary. That was why she did it. Necessary work invited judgment. Unnecessary work belonged to the person choosing it. The hardware purchases told an incomplete story. Raymond had bought a length of black water pipe 9 years earlier. 2 years later, chimney brushes. 3 years after that, bridge spikes and exterior oil. He had visited the tract repeatedly, though less often near the end. Marlene turned over one receipt from a lumber yard. On the back, in Raymond's blocky handwriting, were measurements. Sill, east wall, 11 feet 4 inches. Below that, he had written, not alone. It sounded less like advice than an argument he had lost. Her phone buzzed beside the papers. Derek. Need password for Orchard payroll file. She stared at the message. He had not asked where she was. He had not asked why she had stopped at the road. Her hands knew the password before she consciously recalled it. The farm's original parcel number, followed by Thomas's initials. She typed, I'll prepare a handoff list for the farm records. After that, you'll need your own system. 3 dots appeared. We need access now. Vendors are due Friday. Marlene looked at Raymond's careful measurements. She could let Derek struggle. The thought gave her a quick, mean warmth. Then she pictured Hazel Boone at the pruning supply company, waiting for a payment she depended on, and the warmth cooled. Marlene sent the password. His reply arrived immediately. Got it, no thank you. She opened a fresh notebook and wrote farm transition at the top of the first page. Beneath it, she listed every task Derek did not know she performed. Quarterly sales tax filing, workers' compensation audit, cold storage maintenance schedule, equipment depreciation. She filled 3 pages before midnight. The rain continued through the following day. Martin called to say the recorded access crossed a neighboring parcel from a gravel road and appeared valid, but the old survey pins might no longer be visible. He recommended a county surveyor named Nora Bell before Marlene made any serious decision. I'm only looking, Marlene said. Looking is how serious decisions dress when they want to get inside. On the second morning, the rain stopped. Marlene left before dawn with the survey, the faded tag key, bottled water, a flashlight, a pry bar, and the teal raincoat she had hung beside Thomas's for years. The gravel easement climbed through wet forest and narrowed until branches brushed both sides of her station wagon. At its end, she found no building, only a patch where Raymond had once turned his truck around and a footpath vanishing into rhododendron. She walked slowly. Her left knee disliked the descents more than the climbs, and wet leaves concealed roots polished by years of weather. The path remained on the west side of the creek as the water gathered force below her. Once she found a cedar post bearing a scrap of blue paint. Farther on, 2 stones had been placed to divert runoff. Raymond's work, perhaps, or someone's before him. The roar built gradually, then all at once. Marlene stepped around a shoulder of rock and reached the slick plank bridge below the falls. Mist dampened her gray hair. The rail felt cold beneath her palm. When she pulled the rhododendron aside and saw the cabin beyond the falling water, the question escaped her before caution could stop it. "Raymond, what did you do?" Nothing answered except the waterfall. She crossed the bridge one deliberate step at a time. The boards flexed, but held. On the east bank, a faint path climbed upstream through ferns and slick stone. By the time she reached the porch, her knee was trembling. The key fit the cabin door. It would not turn. Marlene pushed her shoulder against the weathered wood, tried again, and heard something move inside. Not footsteps, but a soft, dragging sound followed by a single hard knock. She froze with both hands on the key. Then rainwater fell from an overhead branch, struck the roof, and ran through a gap near the chimney. Inside, something knocked again. The knock came a third time, softer now. Marlene pulled the pry bar from the loop of her tool bag. "If you're a bear," she called through the door, "I'm going to be deeply disappointed in both of us." The key had turned halfway. She worked it back, lifted the door by its iron latch, and felt the old wood shift against something inside. She pushed. A scrape crossed the floor, followed by the same hard knock. Not an animal. A chair. The cabin floor sloped toward the doorway, and somebody had propped a straight-back chair beneath the latch. Each gust pressed the door inward just far enough to drag one chair leg across the boards, then let it drop. Marlene leaned harder until the chair toppled. The door opened with a groan, releasing air that smelled of cold ashes, damp wood, and mice. "Well," she told the chair, "you put on a convincing performance." Light entered through 2 small windows, both clouded with grime. The cabin was one room with a sleeping loft above the rear half. An iron stove stood on a square of flat stones. There was a table, 2 chairs, including the one she had assaulted, a narrow counter with an enamel basin, and chestnut shelves fixed to the log wall with handmade brackets. Nothing gleamed. Nothing waited to explain itself. A rusted stovepipe rose toward the roof beside the stone chimney. Water had come through near the flashing and run down the stone, leaving a black stain that reached the floor. An old roasting pan sat beneath the worst drip. One end held several inches of rainwater. The other end rested on a folded roofing shingle wrapper, as if Raymond had attempted to level it and lost interest midway. Marlene crossed to the nearest window and tested the floor with each step. The boards flexed but did not crumble. She opened the shutter, then the window. Cool air moved in, carrying the waterfall's steady roar. From inside, the sound was lower and fuller. It did not seem attached to a view. The falls were downstream and partly hidden behind the bank, but their vibration traveled through the cabin walls. She climbed the loft ladder 3 rungs before her knee told her it had already exceeded the day's contract. She climbed one more because she disliked being negotiated with by her own joints. The loft held a narrow cot frame, a rolled mattress, and a wool blanket sealed in a plastic storage bag. The roof decking looked dry over most of the space. Near the chimney, however, daylight showed in 2 thin lines where flashing had pulled away. Marlene took pictures with her phone. "Roof," she said aloud. "Chimney. Humiliation by ladder." Her voice sounded oddly domestic in the small room. Back downstairs, she inspected the east wall. Near the floor, the lowest log rested on a timber sill, darkened by moisture. She pressed the point of her pry bar into it. The metal sank an inch with little resistance. 11 feet, 4 inches. Raymond's measurement had been exact. "Not alone," she murmured. The sill was not a patch job. Replacing it would mean supporting part of the wall, removing damaged wood, and fitting a new timber without shifting the logs above it. Marlene knew enough construction to recognize the edge of what she did not know. That knowledge had saved Thomas more money than confidence ever had. She tested the hand pump beside the basin. Its handle moved too easily. 3 strokes produced a cough of air and a smell of old iron. A black pipe disappeared through the back wall, probably leading uphill toward a spring. She followed it outside until leaves and rhododendron swallowed the line. Behind the cabin stood a woodshed containing half a cord of split oak, a dented wheelbarrow, and a collection of shortboards too useful to discard and too random to organize. Raymond had labeled 3 coffee cans: nails, bent nails, and good bent nails. Marlene picked up the 3rd can and shook it. That's just optimism. A path behind the woodshed led to a small outhouse, leaning slightly but still upright. Beyond it, the slope climbed north through tulip poplar, oak, and dense laurel. The 19 acres might sound spacious on paper, but most of them seemed determined to stand vertically. She returned to the porch and sat on the top step. Mist had thinned in the hollow. Across the creek, the path by which she had arrived vanished behind the waterfall and rock shoulder. From here, she could see why the cabin had disappeared from the approach. Raymond had not hidden it. The land had simply arranged itself so that a person had to come far enough before the place appeared. Her phone had no signal. Marlene ate half a granola bar, drank water, and watched a copper leaf spin in the creek. She had slept poorly for weeks. Weariness moved through her so deeply that the porch boards seemed to rise and settle beneath her. For a reckless minute, she imagined a bed in the loft, coffee heating on the iron stove, and her walnut dresser somehow carried across that bridge. Then she looked at the gap beside the chimney. A home was not the same thing as a structure that happened to possess a door. A home needed dry walls, safe heat, water, access, and money. Especially money. She stood and took more pictures. By the time she reached the station wagon, the sun had climbed above the ridge. A red pickup was parked behind her, blocking the turnaround. Its driver leaned against the hood with his arms folded. He was perhaps 70, spare through the shoulders, with a white beard trimmed close, and a brown canvas jacket repaired at one elbow. A black dog sat beside his boot, gazing at Marlene with the calm judgment of a bank officer. "You, Marlene?" the man asked. She stopped 6 feet away. "Depends who's asking." "Calvin Price. I own the lower parcel. Saw a car headed up here and figured somebody was lost or stealing timber badly. I'm not lost, then we can eliminate one." The dog stood, stretched, and came to sniff Marlene's boot. Calvin nodded toward the footpath. "You went all the way in?" "Yes. Bridge still there?" "It was when I crossed it twice." "That's not what I asked." Marlene studied him. "It flexes. The west rail is loose near the second post. Algae on 6 or 7 boards. Worst near the center. One board has a split running with the grain, but it isn't open yet." Calvin's mouth shifted under his beard. "Guess you looked at it. I generally look at things I'm standing on." The dog leaned against her leg. Marlene scratched behind its ear. "What's his name?" "Female. Juniper." Juniper closed her eyes in approval. "Raymond used to bring her biscuits," Calvin said. "Made her fat. She appears to have recovered. She grieved efficiently. The humor was dry enough to resemble her brother's." Marlene looked back toward the path. "You knew him?" "Some. He didn't make it easy." "No." Calvin waited, perhaps expecting more. When none came, he unfolded his arms. "He hadn't been up since last fall that I saw. I offered to walk in with him. He said he could still manage a roof." "Could he?" "Roof's still leaking, isn't it?" Marlene did not ask how Calvin knew. The patched elbow, his gaze on the trail, and the way he had asked about the bridge suggested long familiarity. "The leak is near the chimney," she said. "Flashing's pulled. There's a rotted sill on the east wall. Water system isn't drawing." Calvin looked at her differently then, not warmly exactly, but with less room between his assessment and hers. "You planning to keep it?" I saw it 40 minutes ago. That doesn't answer the question. It's the only answer I have. He nodded as if that were acceptable. County'll want the boundary confirmed before you assume that Spring's yours. Old Line runs close to my corner above the cabin. Martin Penland recommended Nora Bell. He recommended right. You know her? Everybody who's ever argued with a fence knows Nora. Calvin opened his truck door. Juniper did not move from Marlene's side. You can't stay in that cabin yet, he said. Marlene felt herself harden before deciding whether she disagreed. I didn't say I would. Good. Do you always tell strangers where they can sleep? Only when the roof might drop water into a cold stove and the chimney hasn't been inspected in years. The roof is not collapsing. Didn't say it was. You implied it. I implied wet chimneys make bad roommates. Juniper looked from one to the other. Calvin whistled. The dog ignored him. He sighed. That's what I get for letting Raymond feed her. Marlene opened her station wagon. I need to turn around. I noticed. He moved the truck, then stood by while she backed carefully between two banks of laurel. His supervision irritated her until she saw how close her rear tire came to a drainage rut. Before she left, he approached her window and handed her a folded scrap of paper with a telephone number. I'm a retired carpenter, he said. Retired means I complain twice as much and work half as fast. What does looking cost? Looking costs coffee. Advice costs more because nobody values it when it's free. I'm not hiring anybody yet. Didn't ask you to. She tucked the number beside the survey. As she drove down the easement, Calvin and Juniper shrank in the mirror. At the paved road, her phone recovered its signal and delivered 4 messages. 2 were from Louise asking whether she needed dinner. 1 was from Martin asking her to call after the inspection. The last was from Ellen. Derek says you changed the payroll system. Marlene stopped at a gas station and read it twice. Then she called Ellen. I didn't change anything, she said when Ellen answered. I gave him the password and a 3-page handoff list. He says the vendor codes don't match the invoices. They match if he opens the current year file instead of the archive. There was a rustle, as if Ellen had covered the phone and relayed this. He found it, she said. Miraculous. Marlene, he's overwhelmed. So am I. I know. Do you? Silence stretched between them, filled on Marlene's end by the gas station's humming sign. Ellen lowered her voice. Where are you? Near Spruce Pine. Why? Marlene looked through the windshield at her boots, muddy from Raymond's trail. My brother died. Oh, Marlene. He left some land. There's a cabin. Another pause, different from the first. You never said Raymond owned a cabin. I didn't know. Is it worth anything? The question was sensible. It still landed badly. The roof leaks, the water doesn't run, the bridge is growing its own weather. So naturally, I'll be retiring there in luxury. I didn't mean, I have to go. Ellen said her name, but Marlene ended the call. At Louise's, she spread her photographs across the table by printing them on the little machine in the drugstore. She made 3 columns in her notebook. Necessary can wait, unknown. Roof and chimney went under necessary. So did sill, water, bridge, access, heat. The necessary column reached the bottom of the page. She wrote her available savings at the top of another sheet, subtracted 1 more month of rent, estimated food, gasoline, probate costs, and an emergency reserve she refused to touch. The number left over looked insultingly small. Then she called Nora Bell. Nora's voice was brisk. She asked for the parcel number, the survey date, and the recorded easement reference. Marlene had all 3 ready. I can meet you Thursday morning, Nora said. $620 for the boundary and access review, assuming the old monumentation is recoverable. Marlene looked at the photograph of the dark cabin above the creek. $620 would not repair a single board. It would only tell her whether the boards were truly within the land she might eventually own. Thursday, she said. After the call, she entered the amount beneath survey and drew a line through more than a quarter of what she could safely spend. For the first time since Derek had given her 60 days, the subtraction felt like a decision she had made herself. Nora Bell arrived at 7 Thursday morning in a county truck the color of weak tea. She stepped out wearing an orange vest over a quilted jacket and carried a survey receiver on a pole as casually as another person might carry an umbrella. She was in her late 40s, broad-shouldered, with black hair braided tightly down her back. She glanced at Marlene's station wagon, then at the gravel easement climbing into the trees. "You brought the old survey?" Marlene handed it over. Recorded deed references, clipped behind it. Tax map, folded in the pocket. Nora looked at her for the first time. "You've dealt with surveyors before. I've dealt with people who charge by the hour. That'll teach a person." They began at the paved road where Nora checked the easement description against existing markers and the instruments in her truck. The right of access was recorded, 30 feet wide on paper, though rhododendron and erosion had narrowed the usable portion to little more than one vehicle. It crossed Calvin's lower parcel and ended at the old turnaround. "You can drive through," Nora said. "You can maintain what's here. Anything beyond ordinary maintenance, widening, cutting a new route, bringing utilities, you'd need to read the exact language and likely talk with the affected owner. I'm not widening anything. People say that before they meet a concrete truck. I'm trying to decide whether I can afford roofing nails." Nora gave her a quick sideways glance. "Then we're at a healthy stage of the relationship." At the turnaround, Nora fitted equipment into a pack while Marlene took the lighter case before being asked. The morning was colder than her first visit. Her breath showed where the footpath entered the trees. Nora moved quickly but not carelessly, stopping at old blazes and piles of stone that looked accidental until she scraped away moss. They found the first iron pin beneath a mat of oak leaves. The second had vanished, but Nora located two older monuments and calculated its former position without drama. The west boundary ran above the creek for a stretch, then angled uphill. The footpath remained within Raymond's tract, except for a short bend near the turnaround, which the recorded easement covered. Nothing had shifted into a neighbor's land merely because the brush had grown thick enough to blur every edge. At the waterfall, Nora stopped before the bridge. "That rail won't last another season." "I know. You cross it already?" "Twice." Nora looked at the wet boards. "Of course you did. They went one at a time." The waterfall was lower than it had been 2 days earlier, though mist still silvered Marlene's raincoat. Once they reached the east bank, Nora climbed the slope above the cabin and worked through laurel so dense that both women emerged with leaves in their hair. The upper corner pin stood beneath a chestnut oak. From there, the line traveled beyond the spring box, a low stone structure covered by a rusted sheet of metal. Nora took readings around it, checked her screen, then walked down slope toward the cabin. "The spring's inside your brother's boundary," she said, "by about 22 feet. Don't treat that as a water quality opinion." "I wasn't planning to drink optimism." "Good. It carries parasites." The cabin sat comfortably within the tract. So did the waterfall, from the lip to the plunge pool and the creek below the bridge. Nora confirmed each point without turning the news into a revelation. It was simply what the old records had indicated. 19 steep acres, overgrown but intact, containing one waterfall and one small cabin that needed work. Marlene stood near the porch while Nora entered figures in her field book. "Does the waterfall make the land valuable?" she asked. Nora capped her pen. "It makes it beautiful." "That wasn't my question." "Then the answer is maybe to somebody, but not in the way people imagine. Access is difficult. Septic approval could be difficult. The terrain limits construction. Anything commercial brings insurance, parking, permits, neighbor complaints, and people falling off wet rocks because they wanted a photograph. So no sack of money floating in the pool. If you see one, don't reach for it until I've checked which side of the line it's on." Marlene smiled despite the ache gathering behind her kneecap. Nora studied the cabin. "Are you thinking about living here?" "I'm thinking about whether it's possible." "That's different." "Yes." Nora closed her field book. "Possible is not my department. But the land is where the records say it is. The access exists, and that building isn't sitting on somebody else's property. For $620, Marlene had purchased no lumber, no heat, and no certainty that the roof would survive December. Yet when Nora drove away, the woods felt subtly changed, not safer, not easier, defined. Calvin came up the trail an hour later, carrying a toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. Juniper followed with a biscuit already in her mouth. "You fed her before coming," Marlene said. "That was Raymond's policy, and we've established Raymond nearly ruined her." Calvin set the thermos on the porch. "Coffee's the inspection fee. You're supplying it next time." "I wasn't told there'd be a next time. You haven't heard the price yet." He began with the bridge. He crouched to examine the split board, drove an awl into the posts, and leaned his weight against the loose rail. "2 deck boards soon," he said. "Rail post before hard freeze. Rest needs scrubbing and traction cleats. Don't pressure wash it unless you want to launch rotten fibers at the waterfall. What would you use? Stiff brush. Oxygen cleaner. Patience and language you wouldn't use in church. I'm qualified in 2 of those." At the cabin, Calvin walked around the exterior twice before opening his toolbox. He pushed his knife into the east sill, measured the soft section, and looked along the wall. Raymond knew about this. "I found his measurement. He asked me about jacking the wall last year. Did you help him?" He didn't ask for help. He asked how. The distinction sounded familiar enough to irritate her on Raymond's behalf. Calvin climbed into the loft and onto the roof while Marlene stayed below, passing tools through the window. She resented the arrangement until he shifted one boot near the chimney and sent a stream of water from a hidden pocket down onto the roasting pan. "You see that?" he called. "I hear it. Flashing's bad on the uphill side. Some decking's gone soft. How much?" "Depends what's under the shingles. That phrase should be illegal. Carpenters would starve." He came down with moss on his jacket and a smear of black on one sleeve. At the stove, he removed the lower pipe and shone a light inside. Flakes of creosote and mortar fell onto the stones. "No fire until this is cleaned and the chimney caps checked," he said. "You can run a small electric heater if you bring a generator, but not while you sleep, and not inside with you unless you're eager to die stupid. I have strong preferences about the manner." "Good. Put that in the budget." They examined the floor, joists visible from the downhill side, and the porch supports. One porch post needed resetting. The main floor was sound enough. The chestnut logs had weathered but remained solid except where water had reached the sill. At the spring box, Calvin lifted the rusted cover with a pry bar. The basin beneath held clear water over silt and drowned leaves. A cracked coupling had allowed the intake pipe to pull air. "Line itself may be clogged," he said, "or crushed, or full of salamanders with strong property rights. Can it be restored? Probably. How much does probably cost? More than maybe, less than guaranteed." Back at the cabin, Marlene opened her notebook. Calvin drank coffee from the thermos cap and watched her list materials. "Give me numbers," she said. "I don't give numbers before I know what's under the shingles. Give me a range. You'll hear the high end and stop sleeping. I'm already not sleeping." He named figures for flashing, decking, chimney work, a replacement sill, bridge repairs, and plumbing materials. Even the lowest total exceeded what Marlene had available after rent and emergency savings. She checked his assumptions, asked whether the sill could be replaced in sections, asked what roofing could wait until spring, asked how much the price changed if she cleared debris, carried materials, removed damaged boards, and handled disposal herself. Calvin lowered the thermos cap. "You do this kind of work? I maintained a farm for 40 years. That can mean anything from driving a tractor to arranging flowers at the roadside stand. I replaced pump bearings, repaired gates, ran irrigation line, and rebuilt the office after a pipe burst. I don't jack log walls, lay chimney flashing, or pretend that watching somebody do it once makes me qualified." Calvin scratched his beard. "That's a better answer than most men give." "I'm not most men." "I noticed." She turned the notebook toward him. "If I do what I can safely do, What does skilled labor cost? He named an hourly rate that was fair and impossible. Marlene closed the notebook. Calvin refilled his cap. You really kept farm books? Payroll, vendors, taxes, equipment schedules, operating loans. You know anything about timber leases? I know their contracts attached to arithmetic. I lease a pad and access to 2 fellows running a portable sawmill on my south acreage. They pay by production, subtract some hauling, buy some fuel through me, and send statements designed by people who hold paper in contempt. Are the contracts clear? Probably. More than maybe? Less than guaranteed. Marlene looked at him. Calvin drank his coffee. How far behind are you? She asked. Depends what you mean by behind. That far? He sighed. Receipts are in boxes. Deposits are in the bank. Mostly. My accountant says if I arrive in January with another feed sack full of paper, she'll charge me a livestock handling fee. You want bookkeeping, you want carpentry. I can't trade labor I haven't priced. Neither can I. She reopened the notebook. They agreed to begin with 4 hours each. Marlene would review his lease, statements, invoices, and deposits, then tell him whether the books required correction or merely discipline. In return, Calvin would open a small section near the chimney, determine the actual damage, and produce a materials list and repair sequence. No vague favors, no debt carried in anyone's head. Materials are yours, he said. I assumed. People get romantic about barter. I don't get romantic about accounts payable. Calvin held out his hand. His palm was rough, 2 fingers stiff from old injuries. Marlene shook it. Juniper, who had slept beneath the table through the negotiation, lifted her head as though a contract had been signed in her name. Before leaving, Calvin helped Marlene remove the moldy mattress from the loft. They dragged it down the ladder, through the door, and onto the porch. Dust rose in a gray cloud. That counts against my 4 hours, he said. You spent most of it giving instructions. Skilled instructions. You said pull. I said it at the correct time. They left the mattress beneath a tarp for later disposal. Marlene swept the loft, then the main floor. She did not clean deeply. Cleaning could disguise a decision as progress. Still, she emptied the roasting pan, set it beneath the leak again, and wiped mouse droppings from the chestnut shelves. In the bottom drawer of the table, she found a carpenter's pencil, 2 packets of stove matches, and an old brass bottle opener shaped like a trout. Nothing valuable, nothing she needed. She placed the pencil beside her notebook. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "Minimum to inhabit safely, dry roof, sound chimney, stable sill, safe bridge, clean water, reliable heat." The list was shorter than the necessary column and more frightening because every item truly was. On the porch, the light had begun to fade. The cabin stood behind her with its bad roof, crooked floor, and one wall that could not be repaired by determination. Marlene locked the door and tested it twice. For the first time, the key turned cleanly. The key turned less politely the next morning, but it turned. Marlene carried in cleaning supplies, a battery lantern, and the electric kettle Louise had insisted she borrow despite the absence of electricity. You can stare at it and remember civilization, Louise had said. The kettle now sat uselessly on the cabin counter while Marlene swept acorn shells from beneath the stove. She had brought coffee in a thermos, though not enough to satisfy Calvin, who arrived carrying 2 banker's boxes and a feed sack full of paper. You said receipts were in boxes, she said. They are. And the sack? Advanced filing. He set everything on the table. Juniper curled beneath it. Marlene opened the first box. Sawdust coated a layer of fuel receipts, deposit slips, mill production statements, and envelopes with windows. Have these been stored in a wood shop? Would you feel better if I lied? No. Then yes. Calvin went into the loft with a hammer, pry bar, and work light. He removed shingles near the chimney, 1 careful row at a time, while Marlene sorted paper below. Whenever he struck something, dust drifted onto her accounts. You're depreciating the documents, she called. They were low-value assets to start with. She divided the table into piles by year and type. The two men leasing Calvin's sawmill pad had recorded production in board feet, subtracted hauling from some loads, billed fuel through Calvin on others, and occasionally combined 3 deliveries on one statement. Nothing suggested theft. It suggested 3 people who understood lumber better than numbers and believed every misunderstanding could be cured by writing a note in the margin. Marlene found checks Calvin had deposited without recording, fuel charges he had never passed through, and 2 hauling deductions applied to loads the contract classified as buyer pickup. "How often do you review their statements?" she asked. Calvin's boots stopped moving overhead. "I look at them." "That was not my question. I review the important parts." "How do you identify the important parts?" "The numbers are darker." Marlene took off her glasses and looked toward the loft. "You've been paying 12% of costs the lease assigns to them." Calvin's head appeared between the railing posts. 12, approximately. "I need the missing statements before I can give you an exact figure." He came down the ladder more quickly than a retired man with stiff fingers ought to have. "Are they shorting me?" "I don't know. Your records are too incomplete to accuse anybody of anything. Some statements use the wrong deduction. Some of your own invoices never went out. You also deposited one payment twice in your handwritten ledger, so don't climb onto the moral roof yet." Calvin pulled out the other chair. Marlene showed him the contract paragraph, matched it to 3 statements, and explained where the categories had wandered. Calvin listened without interrupting, which surprised her more than his paperwork had. When she finished, he rubbed the white edge of his beard. "I thought the lease was supposed to be simple. It is simple. That's why you stopped paying attention." Juniper sighed beneath the table. "Even the dog thinks that was unkind," Calvin said. "The dog has watched you carry receipts in a feed sack." He went outside and returned with another metal cash box from his truck. Marlene stared at it. "What?" he asked. "If you produce a shoebox, our agreement becomes punitive. The cash box contained the missing statements." By noon, Marlene had built a ledger in her notebook and written a list of records she needed from his bank. Calvin had uncovered the roofing damage. 2 decking boards near the uphill side of the chimney were soft across 18 inches, and the old flashing had cracked at a folded seam. The repair was worse than a simple patch and better than replacing the entire roof. He drew the damaged area on the back of an envelope. New decking here and here. Ice and water membrane around the chimney. Proper step flashing, counter flashing cut into the mortar joint. Several shingles replaced. Chimney needs repointing in 2 spots. Materials? He named a figure $480 above his lowest estimate. Marlene did not react. She wrote it down, added tax, and asked about waste. Calvin watched her calculate. "You could wait on the counter flashing," he said. "Patch the seam and probably get through winter." "Probably?" "I wouldn't do it on my house." "Then we won't do it on mine." The last word entered the room before she had decided to use it. Calvin did not look up from the envelope. "All right." The probate had not finished. Martin had warned her twice that the track still belonged to Raymond's estate until the required process ran its course. But necessary preservation work could be documented, and Marlene had begun keeping every receipt in a folder labeled cabin, not home, not yet. She crossed out cabin and wrote property. That felt no safer. Calvin carried damaged shingles outside while she cleaned the roasting pan. The roof stood open beneath a square of tarp, the rotten decking exposed. Weather was expected to remain clear for 2 days. "I can get materials tomorrow," he said, "if you decide." "What happens if I don't?" "We close it with what's sound, patch the tarp, and hope the wind respects our personal journey." Marlene looked at her figures. After the survey, another month at Louise's, and the roof materials, her unrestricted savings would fall below the amount she had promised herself she would never cross. The emergency reserve remained untouched. Barely. "I'll decide by 4, she said. Calvin nodded. He did not tell her the obvious. A roof could not wait for courage to become affordable. Marlene spent the afternoon clearing leaves from the uphill drainage ditch. Water had been running toward the east sill instead of around the cabin, feeding the rot Raymond had measured. She used a mattock to reopen the shallow channel, then move loose stone by hand. At 3, her knee began to burn. She ignored it for 15 minutes, planted her left boot on wet ground, and felt the joint buckle. The mattock dropped. Marlene caught herself against the cabin wall with both palms. Pain went up her thigh and left her breathing through her teeth. Calvin appeared around the corner carrying lumber scraps. What happened? Nothing. You always grab buildings when nothing happens? My foot slipped. He studied her stance. Sit down. I'm fine. Then sit down efficiently. I don't need Marlene. The use of her name, without softness or command, stopped her. She lowered herself onto the porch step. Her knee trembled. Calvin brought the thermos, then waited while she tested the joint with slow movements. Swollen? He asked. Not yet. Old injury. Tractor step. 12 years ago. Doctor? 12 years ago. I meant now. I know what you meant. Calvin leaned against the porch post. You clear that whole ditch yourself? Most of it. That wasn't in our trade. I didn't ask you to do it. No. You just tried to finish before anybody could offer. The resemblance to Raymond's note irritated her. I know my limits. You just fell over one. I slipped. Of course. He walked away before she could answer and finished the final 6 feet of ditch without asking permission. Marlene sat furious on the step until the pain subsided enough to reveal that he had been right. Her phone rang in her pocket. Derek. She nearly let it go to voicemail, but anger had already sharpened her. What is it? He hesitated. Is this a bad time? Yes. I can call back. Tell me what you need. The quarterly tax worksheet has a discrepancy. It doesn't. The total receipts don't match deposits. Did you subtract the roadside cash sales? I included them. They're included in receipts, not bank deposits. Cash sales go through the cash-on-hand ledger until the Monday deposit. Silence. Then the sound of a keyboard. Where's that ledger? Blue tab in the current year binder. Another pause. Got it, he said. Marlene looked at Calvin working the ditch, his movements steady and economical. Derek, I'm finished providing unpaid farm support. What does that mean? It means I gave you the password, the files, and a transition list. If you want me to train you or reconcile accounts, my rate is $35 an hour, 2-hour minimum. He gave a short laugh that contained no amusement. You're charging family? The waterfall moved behind the trees, unseen from the porch, but impossible not to hear. You told me I wasn't an employee, Marlene said. The trust says I'm not an owner. You can't remove every category except family and then use family as the reason I should work for free. That's not what I'm doing. It's exactly what you're doing. Dad would have expected you to help us transition. Your father expected many things. I don't have time to argue, then stop asking questions you already have the answer to. Marlene, the farm's under pressure. So am I. He exhaled into the phone. Fine, send me your hours. I haven't agreed to work. Another silence. Longer now. What are you doing near Spruce Pine? He asked. Ellen told you. She said Raymond left you some land. Raymond died. The land is part of his estate. What kind of land? The interest in his voice was not concern, but Marlene was too tired to examine it. Steep, she said. Wet. Expensive. She ended the call. Calvin had stopped working. 35 is low. You were listening? You were broadcasting. I charge 35 because I know the system. If he wants market rates, he can discover them. What did he pay you before? Marlene looked at him. His expression changed. Right. At 4, she called the building supplier and paid for the roof materials with her debit card. The woman read back the total. Marlene watched the number disappear from her available balance online. No music played. No certainty arrived. The cabin looked exactly as needy as it had 5 minutes before. Calvin loaded his tools. I'll pick up supplies at 7, he said. You've used more than 4 hours. So have you. I haven't finished your ledger. I haven't finished your roof. Then we track the difference. He smiled. You planning to issue me a quarterly statement? If necessary. Her knee had stiffened by the time she reached Louise's stairs. She climbed sideways, one step at a time. Louise saw her through the window and opened the door before she knocked. What did you do? Apparently, I fell over a limit. That sounds expensive. It was $480 more than expected. Louise brought ice wrapped in a dish towel and placed it on Marlene's knee, while Marlene sat at the table with Calvin's statements. A voicemail waited from Nora. Marlene, this is Nora Bell. I spoke to the owner of Pine Ridge Market about you. Her bookkeeper left in September, and she needs someone to clean up 2 months of records. I did not promise your time. Her name is Tessa Ward. Call me if you want the number. Marlene replayed the message. Then she set the ice aside, opened her notebook, and wrote Pine Ridge Market beneath possible income. Her knee hurt. The roof was open. Her savings were smaller than they had been that morning. For the first time, the income column was no longer blank. Louise refused to return the ice pack until Marlene called Tessa Ward. You'll sit here organizing a stranger's lumber receipts for free and avoid a woman offering actual money, she said. That is not a financial plan. That is a personality defect. I'm waiting until business hours. It's 8:20. Some people don't appreciate calls before 9. Those people don't own markets. They've been awake since 5 arguing with bread. Marlene called. Tessa answered over the shrill beep of a checkout scanner. She spoke rapidly, asked 3 questions at once, and invited Marlene to Pine Ridge Market at 10. The market occupied a cinder block building near the highway with 2 gas pumps out front and a hand-painted sign advertising coffee, bait, and local honey. Inside, shelves were packed tightly enough that 2 people with baskets had to negotiate passage. Tessa was 58, compact and energetic, with reading glasses hanging from a red cord. She shook Marlene's hand, pointed toward a cramped office, and kept walking. My last bookkeeper said she needed a week off, she said. That was September 6th. She moved to Florida. Did she take records? No, just her cactus and the good stapler. The office contained a desk, a computer, 3 milk crates of invoices, and a wall calendar still turned to August. Tessa had continued paying vendors and depositing receipts, but had not reconciled either bank account. Her point-of-sale system exported daily totals. Half had been entered into the accounting program. The rest existed as paper printouts clipped together with a clothespin. Who files your sales tax? Marlene asked. I do. When? Tessa stopped moving. That bad? That depends what answer you were about to give. They sat together while Marlene reviewed the accounts. The books were neglected, not destroyed. Deposits matched sales within ordinary cash variances. Several vendor bills appeared unpaid only because Tessa had entered checks in the wrong month. One beverage distributor had been paid twice, but the extra amount remained as a credit. Tessa watched Marlene move through the files. You're fast. I've seen worse. How much worse? I once found a tractor classified as office furniture. Did you fix it? The tractor didn't care. Marlene estimated 12 hours to bring the books current, assuming the bank statements were complete. She quoted $32 an hour, then waited. Tessa frowned at the milk crates. How much to keep them from getting like this again? After cleanup, 8 hours a month. Maybe less once I understand your routine. Can you start today? I have a roof open. Tessa blinked. On your office? On a cabin. That's a sentence with more questions than I have time for. They agreed Marlene would return the following afternoon. Tessa wrote a check for 6 hours in advance. The check was not large. It would cover groceries, gasoline, and part of Louise's rent. Marlene held it in the station wagon and felt something inside her settle. Not relief, exactly. Relief expected rescue. This was work. At the cabin, Calvin had already carried the first load of materials across the bridge. A roll of membrane, sheet metal, bundles of replacement shingles, mortar, and 2 lengths of decking waited beneath a tarp. You lift all that alone? Marlene asked. Juniper carried the shingles. The dog lay in a patch of sun, asleep. Calvin looked at Marlene's knee. "How is it?" "Attached." "That wasn't—" "I know. It's stiff, not unstable. I iced it." "Good. I also obtained paid work." "Better." She showed him Tessa's check before slipping it into her notebook. Calvin whistled. "You buying lunch? You brought a feed sack to an accounting appointment. You're still under review." They worked through the morning. Calvin removed the soft decking while Marlene stayed below, measuring and marking replacement boards. She cut the waterproof membrane on the table, kept tools within reach, and recorded each material used. When Calvin needed help positioning metal, she climbed only high enough on the loft ladder to hold one end from inside. The labor was slower because she refused to pretend her knee was normal. It was also steadier. She sat before pain forced her to sit. She carried half loads. She discovered that accepting a limitation before it became an emergency felt less like surrender than she had expected. Calvin fit the new decking and sealed around the chimney. His hands moved with an assurance built from repetition, but he explained what he was doing without suggesting explanation, made her qualified to do it alone. "Water comes downhill," he said, layering the step flashing with the shingles. "Construction gets expensive when people forget. Bookkeeping, too." What comes downhill in bookkeeping? Consequences. By mid-afternoon, clouds had gathered above the ridge. Calvin installed the counter flashing while Marlene repointed the lower chimney joint from the loft under his direction. The work was small enough for her hands and visible enough for him to correct. "Too wet," he said after her first attempt. "It's mortar. That doesn't mean we're making soup." She scraped it out and began again. When rain started, it struck the repaired roof in scattered taps. Marlene placed the roasting pan beneath the old leak and watched. One drop fell from water already clinging to the stone. Then nothing. They waited through a heavier shower. The pan remained dry. Calvin sat on the other chair, opened the thermos, and poured coffee into the cap. "You're smiling," he said. "I am not. You're doing it now. I'm checking for leaks." "With your teeth?" Marlene turned toward the window so he could not see. The rain lasted 15 minutes. Not enough to prove the repair against a storm, but enough to change the cabin's smell. Damp stone remained, yet no fresh water ran down the chimney. Calvin took a folded statement from his jacket. "The sawmill fellows came by this morning," he said. "They agree the hauling was entered wrong. We're correcting it against the next 3 payments." "How much?" $742. "That includes your unbilled fuel?" "Yes. Then only 406 was their error. Only. They made a mistake. You failed to invoice." "Those are different problems." He studied the paper. "You always this determined to prevent people from feeling righteous? It interferes with arithmetic." Calvin set the statement beside her notebook. 4 hours of yours saved me more than 4 hours of mine. That doesn't change our agreement." "No. But it changes whether I feel foolish offering another trade. The sill timber would need to be milled. Calvin could obtain seasoned white oak through the same sawmill, though Marlene would pay for it. Replacing the damaged section would take 2 people and most of a day, longer if the wall resisted lifting. "What do you need done?" she asked. "My books brought current, a simple invoice form. Monthly reconciliation through December so my accountant doesn't skin me. That's more than a day, so's the sill." They compared hours, assigned rates, and wrote the terms in Marlene's notebook. Calvin initialed the page with such exaggerated ceremony that she nearly charged him extra. Martin called as they finished. "The estate notice has been filed," he said. "Everything is proceeding normally. Keep documenting preservation expenses. I still advise against spending more than you can afford to lose before distribution. Define afford. I'm an attorney, not a philosopher." "Good, because philosophers are terrible with receipts." He hesitated. "How bad is the structure?" "Roof was repaired today. Sill comes next. Waterline after that." "You sound committed." "I sound accurate." "That wasn't my question." Marlene watched Calvin cover the remaining materials. "I don't have another place that might become mine," she said. Martin's answer lost its professional rhythm. "I understand." No, you don't, but I appreciate the tone. After they hung up, Marlene cleaned the mortar from her hands in bottled water. The cabin was colder with the rain. Without a safe stove, daylight controlled the workday. They locked up early. At the bridge, Calvin stopped and pointed to the split board. Next. Before the sill? Before you carry white oak across it. Marlene entered bridge materials beneath necessary. The list kept changing its order without becoming shorter. Her phone found signal near the turnaround. Ellen had left a message. "I have mail for you," she said, "and something from the packing shed that belongs to you. Derek disagrees. I took it anyway. Call me." Marlene replayed the message while Calvin loaded his toolbox. "What?" he asked. "My stepdaughter has discovered burglary. Late vocation, apparently." Marlene called Ellen from the car. "What did you take?" "Your green toolbox, the small one with the socket set." "That belongs to the farm." "No, it doesn't. You brought it when you married Dad. Your initials are scratched underneath." Marlene remembered doing that with a nail before Thomas had built her a shelf in the maintenance room. Derek knows? He does now. How unpleasant was he? He used the phrase, fiduciary responsibility. That unpleasant. Ellen gave a nervous laugh, then grew quiet. "Can I bring it to you? Leave it with Louise." "I could." Marlene waited. "I'd like to see the cabin," Ellen said. The answer in Marlene's mouth was no. It was clean, reasonable, and deserved. Then she thought of Ellen lifting the toolbox in direct opposition to Derek, a small act performed after a silence too large to excuse. "Wear boots," Marlene said. "Not those leather things you call practical." Ellen arrived the following morning in brand new hiking shoes and a cream-colored jacket that had never met mud. She parked beside the station wagon and lifted the green toolbox from her trunk. "I brought your mail, too." Marlene took the box. Its handle was cold, the familiar dent still visible near one latch. "Thank you." Ellen looked toward the footpath. "How far?" "Half a mile." "That's not bad." "It is if you say that before walking it." Ellen managed the first descent well, then slid on wet leaves and grabbed a sapling with both arms. Marlene waited. "Don't," Ellen said. "I haven't said anything. You're saying plenty." At the waterfall, Ellen stopped so suddenly that Marlene nearly walked into her. The cabin appeared beyond the white water and mist, dark against the higher east bank. Ellen stared from the slick bridge to the chestnut logs under copper leaves. "Oh," she said. It was not admiration. It sounded more like the breath a person took after discovering that someone else's impossible plan had a physical address. They crossed carefully. At the porch, Ellen touched the repaired toolbox as if reminding herself why she had come. "You're really going to live here?" "I'm trying to make it possible." Ellen looked at the small cabin, the woodshed, the steep slope, and the path they had just traveled. Then she looked at Marlene's stiff knee. "Does Derek know about the waterfall?" she asked. "No," Marlene said. "Why?" Ellen looked back toward the bridge. "He searched the parcel after you told him Raymond left land. He said there was a creek on the tax map. A creek is not a waterfall." "I know." "Does Derek?" "I haven't told him." Marlene set the green toolbox on the porch. "Were you supposed to?" Ellen's face tightened. "He asked me to see what condition the place was in, so you came for him. I came to return your things and inspect the asset while you were here. That isn't fair." Marlene almost laughed. Fair had become popular with the Hayes family now that she was the person being accused of lacking it. Ellen removed her new hiking shoes on the porch and stepped inside in her socks. "I didn't know there was a waterfall. I didn't know there was a cabin. Derek only said you might not understand what the land could be worth. I paid a surveyor to tell me where it is. I hired a carpenter to assess the structure. I've reviewed access, materials, and 3 repair scenarios. What part did he think I wouldn't understand? The part where you're grieving." Marlene looked at her. Ellen lowered her eyes. "That's what he said." The cabin was cold enough that their breath barely showed. Rain had stopped, but clouds kept the room dim. Ellen walked to the table, touched the dry roasting pan, and examined the fresh mortar beside the chimney. "It smells like Uncle Raymond," she said. "You remember him? He came to Dad's 50th birthday. He brought a bottle of bourbon and insulted the new barn. He said it looked like a courthouse. It did. That birthday had been before the argument, before Raymond stopped calling except on Christmas mornings, when neither he nor Marlene mentioned why the conversations lasted less than 4 minutes. Ellen ran her fingers along the chestnut shelves. "You and he were close once." "Yes." "What happened?" "Nothing that improved with retelling. That sounds like something he'd say." It was. Ellen sat at the table. "I'm sorry he died." This time Marlene heard no request beneath the apology. "Thank you." The quiet that followed was not comfortable, but it was clean. Ellen took a bundle of mail from her bag. Most was forwarded advertising and insurance notices. Among it was an envelope from the farm's bank addressed to Marlene and a postcard from the Farm Supply Cooperative thanking Thomas and Marlene for 30 years of business. Derek had crossed out Marlene's name on the address and written "not at this property." He had not needed to. Marlene turned the card face down. "Did you see that?" Ellen asked. "Yes. I told him it was petty." "Did that improve it?" "No." Ellen's hands flattened on the table. "I should have said something that morning." "You did. You suggested we breathe. I mean something useful." Marlene slid the mail back into its bundle. "Yes, I thought there would be money for you. Dad always said you handled the retirement. I handled his retirement account. The beneficiary designation went to the trust." Ellen's head lifted. "All of it?" "After final expenses." "I didn't know. You knew I worked without wages. I knew you and Dad shared everything. We shared decisions. Legal ownership was apparently less sociable." Ellen stared at the floorboards. "Derek said you chose that arrangement. He is correct. I chose your father. Then I chose the farm every day because it was the life we had. That doesn't make 40 years imaginary. No." It was the first time Ellen had answered without looking away. Marlene waited, but Ellen did not add anything. One quiet no could not repair a kitchen full of silence. It was still more than there had been. Outside, the sound of Calvin's truck traveled faintly through the trees. Marlene stood. "We're repairing the bridge today." "We?" "Calvin and I. I can help. You can carry the traction cleats." Ellen looked down at her cream jacket. "Do they have grease on them?" "Almost certainly." Calvin arrived with juniper, 2 replacement boards, and a bucket containing hardware and stiff brushes. He greeted Ellen without curiosity and handed her the lightest load without making it obvious. At the bridge, Calvin rigged a safety line around a tree and replaced the split board, while Marlene worked from the west bank, clearing leaves and mud from the approach. Ellen scrubbed algae from the planks until dirty green water ran into the creek. "These shoes were a mistake," she said. Marlene leaned on the shovel. "They've learned something. I paid $140 for them. Then they should learn quickly." Ellen laughed, and for half a second the sound belonged to an easier year. Calvin reset the loose rail post, braced it, and demonstrated how he wanted the traction cleats spaced. Marlene measured and marked. Ellen passed fasteners. None of them spoke about why Ellen was there. The work did not require a verdict. When they finished, the bridge remained narrow and weathered, but the boards no longer shone with algae. The new rail post held firm under Calvin's weight. Marlene crossed once, slowly testing every improvement. "Better?" Calvin called. "Safer." That wasn't the question. It's the answer that matters. Ellen left after lunch with mud on her jacket and a raw patch on one palm. At the turnaround, she paused beside her car. "Derek will ask what I saw. You decide what you say. You don't want me to tell him. I want you to stop making me responsible for how you behave around your brother." Ellen absorbed that without protest. "I won't send pictures," she said. Marlene placed the empty tool bag in her station wagon. "That isn't the same as telling the truth." "What is the truth?" "That you knew I helped build the farm's life and let him call it nothing." Ellen's mouth trembled, but Marlene did not rescue her from the sentence. "The truth about here," Ellen said. Marlene looked toward the footpath. "The truth is, I don't know if I can make it through winter." Ellen nodded. She drove away with her dirty shoes wrapped in a grocery bag. Calvin and Marlene spent the afternoon inspecting the spring line. They cleared leaves from the stone box, drained sediment with buckets, and removed the cracked coupling. The intake pipe itself disappeared beneath roots and rock. "If it's blocked near the cabin, we flush it," Calvin said. "If it's crushed halfway down, we dig." "How far?" 120 feet, give or take. Marlene looked at the steep ground. "Try flushing." They disconnected the lower end and forced clean water through in sections. The first attempt produced only brown dribbles. The second dislodged a plug of silt, leaf fragments, and one pale salamander, which landed in the bucket looking personally betrayed. "Strong property rights," Marlene said. Calvin carried it to the creek. After fitting the new coupling and priming the line, they returned to the cabin. Marlene worked the pump handle. Air coughed through the spout. Then a thin rope of cloudy water splashed into the enamel basin. She kept pumping until the water ran clear. "Don't drink it," Calvin said. "I remember the parasites. Get it tested. Boil until then." Marlene cupped one hand under the stream anyway. The water was cold enough to ache against her skin. The roof held. The bridge held. The pump produced water. The cabin was still not habitable. The sill remained rotten. The chimney needed cleaning, and the nights were dropping toward freezing. Yet 3 items in her notebook had shifted from unknown to working. At Pine Ridge Market, the books were less cooperative. Tessa had given a vendor account 2 different names, entered 4 cash deposits as sales a second time, and paid personal electric bills through the business account because the utility company's website stored both numbers together. "I can separate everything," Marlene said, "but you need a personal account that never touches this one." "I know. Do you?" "I know in the same way people know they should eat less salt." Marlene built a checklist Tessa could follow at closing. By the end of the second afternoon, the bank accounts reconciled to within $14.73. Tessa stared at the figure. "Can't we call it close?" "You can. The bank will continue calling it wrong." They found the difference in a transposed fuel delivery. When the reconciliation reached 0, Tessa made Marlene a cup of coffee and slid another stack of invoices onto the desk. "My cousin Joan runs a garden supply place outside Burnsville," she said. "Her accountant retired, and she's been doing her books herself. Badly? She believes stapling a receipt to a calendar counts as accrual accounting. It counts as a cry for help. Can I give her your number?" Marlene hesitated only long enough to calculate 8 additional hours a month. Yes. That evening, Derek paid her for 2 hours of farm work. The payment appeared through a banking app without a note. He had sent exactly $70. Marlene moved it into the account she was using for property expenses and entered it as consulting income. A message followed. "Ellen says there's a 35-foot waterfall." Marlene stared at the screen. Another message arrived. "We should talk before you put more money into that place." She set the phone face down. Louise, sitting across the table with a crossword puzzle, looked over her glasses. "Trouble? Arithmetic wearing family clothes. That sounds contagious." The phone buzzed again. Derek had sent a link to a vacation rental listing in Tennessee. The picture showed a polished log house with a hot tub, a paved driveway, and an artificial waterfall illuminated blue. "Potential here is substantial," he wrote. Marlene turned the phone off. The next morning, she and Calvin carried the white oak sill timber across the repaired bridge. It was heavy enough that they had to stop twice, lowering it onto blocks to protect it from wet ground. At the second stop, Marlene's phone began ringing in her coat pocket. She did not need to look. Calvin adjusted his grip. "You answering?" "No." "Good call or bad call?" "Expensive call." They lifted the timber again. Behind them, the waterfall threw mist across the bridge. Ahead, the cabin waited with its damaged wall and dry roof. Marlene kept her eyes on the ground between her boots. For once, she let Derek's question ring until it stopped. They lowered the timber beside the cabin and stood with their hands on their knees. "White oak gets heavier when you carry it uphill," Calvin said. "It was downhill from the bridge. Then explain the weight. You're older on this side." He considered that. Could be. Replacing the sill began with work that produced no visible improvement. They removed the bottom course of interior trim, cleared the drainage channel again, and exposed enough of the damaged timber to determine where solid wood resumed. Calvin drove a probe along its length. "Rot goes farther west than I thought," he said. "How much farther?" 2 feet. "Do we have enough timber?" "Yes." Raymond measured the whole wall, not just the soft section. Marlene ran her hand over the new oak. He knew. He suspected. That's knowing with less courage. Calvin set 2 screw jacks on cribbing beneath the floor frame. He had brought heavy posts, steel plates, and enough blocking to make the cabin look as though it were being taught to stand all over again. "This part goes slowly," he said. "We lift 1/8 of an inch, check every opening, listen, then lift again. If I say stop, you stop. If the wall speaks in tongues, we both leave." What does a wall speaking in tongues sound like? You'll recognize it. Marlene monitored the door and window frames while Calvin raised the load. The first turn of the jack produced nothing. The second brought a faint creak from the chestnut logs. Dust drifted from a joint near the loft. "Stop," she said. Calvin checked the level. Why? Window moved. How much? Less than a 16th, but the upper corner tightened. He examined it, shifted one support, and began again. They worked in increments until the east wall rested on temporary posts. Only then did Calvin cut out the rotten sill. The first section came away in damp chunks. Carpenter ants had abandoned it long ago, leaving narrow galleries in wood that smelled like wet soil. Marlene carried each piece to the tarp. Her knee held as long as she did not twist. Behind one rotten section, they found a folded strip of asphalt paper with a date written in black marker, 1994. "That yours?" Calvin asked. "Raymond's writing. Would have been when he reset this corner, so it lasted 30 years. Near enough." There was comfort in that, not permanence, but the idea that good work could remain useful long after the person who performed it was gone. They broke for lunch when the old sill was out. Calvin went to his truck for additional clamps, while Marlene searched the woodshed for thinner shims. Raymond had kept them in a coffee can on a high shelf, sorted by width and tied with twine. Behind the can lay a black spiral notebook softened by damp air. The first pages listed tax payments and dates he had cleared the access road. Hardware costs occupied the margins. A sketch of the bridge showed measurements close to the ones Marlene and Calvin had confirmed. She carried the notebook into the cabin and sat at the table. Raymond's entries appeared irregularly, sometimes separated by months. May 14th. Waterline stopped again. Cleared roots above first bend. October 3rd. 2 roof shakes gone. Temporary patch. April 22nd. Calvin says sill needs doing. He is right, which will make him unbearable. Marlene laughed once. Farther back, the notes changed. Raymond had recorded visits in the same blunt language he used for repairs. Marlene here. Brought tomato soup, complained about the pan, and then used it. Marlene slept until 9, claims Waterfall kept her awake. Liar. Another entry came from the summer Thomas had undergone heart surgery. She says she can't stay. Stayed 2 nights. First place she has taken a full breath in months. Marlene stopped reading. She remembered those nights. Thomas had been recovering well, but Derek had called constantly about the farm, irrigation pump, spray schedule, an invoice no one could locate because no one had looked where she told them. Raymond had taken her phone, switched it off, and placed it in the cabin's empty flour tin. "They'll survive 48 hours, he had said. "They shouldn't have to. You say that like your weather." The argument had ended when Raymond made coffee too strong to drink and refused to apologize. Near the back of the notebook, written several years later, was a shorter line. Last place my sister ever seemed to breathe without permission. Marlene closed the cover. The cabin around her remained cold and half-supported by jacks. The sentiment did not transform it. Raymond had written the line and still gone 6 years without calling. She had known his number and had done the same. Grief was full of evidence that arrived too late to cross-examine. Calvin returned carrying clamps. "You find the shims?" Marlene held up the notebook. "Ah, you've read it?" "No, saw him write in it. He mentioned you. Was it flattering? He called you unbearable. Then he was lucid." Calvin set the clamps down. His eyes rested on the notebook, but he did not ask what else it contained. They worked the new sill into place. It needed trimming twice and persuasion with a wooden mallet. Calvin coated the concealed faces, installed a moisture barrier, and eased the wall down by fractions. The door frame remained square. The window opened. When the last jack released its load, the cabin settled onto white oak with a low wooden sigh. Marlene placed one palm against the east wall. Solid. Her phone rang from the table. Derek again. She wiped her hand before answering. "I'm working. So am I. I've been trying to reach you. You reached me yesterday. I chose not to answer." Calvin gathered the jacks and carried them outside. Derek paused. "I want to come see the property." "Why?" "Because you may have more options than you realize." "I know my options." "You can't know them if you won't talk." "I'm talking now." "I have a friend who manages vacation rentals near Boone. Cabins with water features command premium rates." "Water features?" "Waterfalls. Creek frontage. Privacy. You could be sitting on something valuable." Marlene looked through the window. Calvin was stacking rotten sill pieces on the tarp. "I'm sitting on a chair," she said. "The property is in probate. The cabin has one room, no power, uncertain water quality, and a footpath for access. It is not a luxury rental. Not yet. There is no yet. Marlene, don't get defensive. I'm trying to help you think beyond survival." The phrase struck close enough to make her quiet. Derek heard the silence and softened his voice. "You can't live out there alone. You have a bad knee, and winter's coming. If you pour your savings into repairs, you may still end up selling under pressure." Everything he said was possible. That made the use he put it to harder to forgive. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "Let me look at it." "No." "Why not? Because you looked at 40 years of my work and saw nothing. Your eyesight is already in question." She ended the call. Calvin came in for the last brace. "Family arithmetic? It's becoming real estate." He nodded toward the phone. "He wants the waterfall. He wants what he thinks it means. Same thing to some people." Marlene picked up Raymond's notebook. "Can we finish sealing the sill today? If we keep moving." They installed the exterior flashing and replaced the trim with boards Marlene sanded while Calvin worked. The fresh wood did not match the weathered logs. Calvin said time would handle that without charging labor. Near dusk, a man's voice called from the west side of the bridge. "Marlene?" Derek stood at the edge of the footpath in dark pants, a wax jacket, and polished boots, already streaked with mud. He held the loose rail with one hand and stared past the waterfall at the cabin. Calvin looked at Marlene. "You expecting somebody?" "No." Derek crossed carefully. His face carried the same purposeful concern he had worn in the farmhouse kitchen. "I told you not to come," Marlene said. "You told me I couldn't look. You didn't give me a reason. It belongs to Raymond's estate, and you're the heir. That doesn't make it your business." Derek glanced at Calvin. "Calvin Price," Calvin said. "Neighbor Derek Hayes, Marlene's stepson." The possessive claim entered the air and stayed there. Derek walked around the cabin without asking. He looked at the repaired bridge, new roofing near the chimney, and fresh sill trim. When he reached the uphill side, he took out his phone and photographed the roofline. "Delete that," Marlene said. He lowered the phone. "It's a cabin. It's not your cabin." His expression tightened. "I'm not stealing state secrets. No, you're standing on land you weren't invited to inspect." Calvin rested one hand on the porch rail. He did not intervene. His presence was practical, not protective. Derek put the phone away. I drove 2 hours because you're spending money before you know what you have. I know exactly what I have, a repair bill. You have a waterfall people would pay to visit. Nora's warning returned to Marlene. Parking, permits, insurance, wet rocks. They can visit another one. You're thinking emotionally. I paid a surveyor, priced 3 repair scenarios, and created a winter budget. You sent me a rental listing with a hot tub. Derek's cheeks colored. He stepped inside. The cabin's size seemed to surprise him. He looked up at the loft, then out the east window toward the woods. This could be expanded. No. You haven't heard what I'm suggesting. You haven't heard what the land is saying. He gave a tired shake of his head. That doesn't sound like you. What sounds like me? Practical. Marlene set Raymond's notebook on the table. Practical is knowing the difference between a resource and something you consume. Derek walked onto the porch. Mist rose below the falls, and late light turned the wet rock silver. I could take the risk off you, he said. Once probate clears, I could buy the property, give you back what you spend, and enough extra to get settled somewhere sensible. There it was, not an offer with numbers. An assumption wearing generosity. With what money? Marlene asked. The farm can support an investment. The trust's farm? That's right. So the farm I helped build would purchase the only home I might own, and you would call that helping me. Derek looked toward Calvin, embarrassed by the witness. I didn't come to fight. No, you came to turn my uncertainty into your opportunity. She opened the door. Derek's jaw worked once. Then he stepped past her without speaking. At the bridge, he stopped, perhaps expecting her to call him back. Marlene remained on the porch. He crossed and disappeared behind the white water. Calvin picked up the final strip of trim. You want to stop for the day? Marlene looked at the solid oak beneath the wall. No, she said. We finish what we lifted. The final strip of trim resisted every nail. Calvin held it flush while Marlene drove the first one, then the second. The third bent halfway into the white oak. Good bent nail, Calvin said. Don't start. He grinned and passed her another. They finished under the light of battery lanterns. When the trim was secure, Calvin lowered the remaining temporary support and checked the wall one last time. The window opened without binding. The door latched. Outside, the new sill sat level above the cleared drainage channel. Marlene wrote 6.5 hours beside Calvin's name. You missed yesterday's bridge work, he said. It's on the previous page. Chimney assessment? Page 31. You frighten me. You brought this on yourself. Before leaving, she placed Raymond's notebook in a plastic zipper bag and carried it beneath her raincoat across the bridge. The handwritten line about breathing stayed with her, irritating and comforting her in equal measure. Her phone received Ellen's call near the road. Derek came back furious, Ellen said. He arrived that way. He says you embarrassed him in front of your contractor. Calvin is not my contractor. He's a neighbor with bookkeeping problems. I'm not calling about Calvin. No, you're calling because Derek experienced a consequence without understanding it. Ellen took a slow breath. I told him there was a waterfall. Marlene unlocked the station wagon but did not get in. Why? He asked what I saw. I said the land was beautiful and the cabin needed serious work. Then I told him he should leave you alone. Somewhere between beautiful and leave her alone, he found a business plan. I didn't give him directions. He pulled the records online. I know, I should have known how he'd hear it. Marlene watched her breath whiten above the car roof. You keep apologizing as though surprise is your only mistake. What does that mean? You knew how he would hear it. You hoped he wouldn't make you responsible for stopping him. That's not fair. There it is again. Ellen's voice sharpened. What do you want from me, Marlene? I brought your toolbox back. I helped with the bridge. I told Derek the farm treated you badly. In private? Silence. Did you tell him I worked for 40 years? Marlene asked. Did you tell him throwing me out without compensation was wrong? I said he was being too rigid. Rigid I'm trying. No. You're trying not to lose either of us. What's wrong with that? Nothing, if you don't mind losing yourself. Marlene ended the call before anger carried her farther than truth. At Louise's, a document from Derek waited in her email. He called it a proposal, not an offer. He suggested that once the estate distributed the land, the Hayes Trust could purchase it for $38,000, plus reimbursement of documented structural repairs up to $5,000. The arrangement would spare Marlene further expense while allowing responsible evaluation of the property's hospitality potential. Marlene printed the page at Louise's desk. Louise read the first paragraph upside down. Hospitality potential, she said. Does that mean strangers dropping wet towels on your floor? Among other things. Is it a fair price? I don't know. You gonna find out? I'm not selling. That wasn't my question. Marlene folded the proposal and placed it beneath Raymond's receipts. She disliked how quickly the number had converted itself into alternatives. 2 years of modest rent, a dependable used car, a safer emergency reserve. None created a permanent home, but all postponed danger. The next morning, Nora called with the water test result. The first sample showed total coliform, she said. No E. coli, which is good, but don't drink it untreated. What's the remedy? Clean and disinfect the spring box and line, protect the intake from surface runoff, flush, then retest. It may clear. If contamination returns, you'll need a treatment system or another source. Marlene wrote down every step. How much does the retest cost? Nora told her. Of course it does. You want me to lie? No. I already have a carpenter for that. I know Calvin. He lies exclusively about how long work will take. They cleaned the spring box that afternoon. Calvin pumped the basin empty while Marlene removed decayed leaves and scrubbed the stone interior. They redirected a shallow thread of runoff that had been entering above the rusted lid, installed a fitted cover, and disinfected the pipe. The work required buckets, brushes, gloves, and repeated trips up the steep slope. Marlene divided the climb into sections and rested before her knee demanded it. Calvin did not comment. He simply matched her pace. While the line soaked, he cleaned the chimney from the roof. Black flakes dropped into the stovepipe and onto a sheet Marlene had spread across the floor. Flue is sound, he called down. Mortar held. Cap needs new mesh. Cost? $26. Say it again. 26. I wanted to remember what a small number sounded like. When the chimney was reassembled, Calvin built a test fire with 3 pieces of dry oak. The stove drew well. Smoke rose cleanly above the roof instead of leaking into the loft. Heat spread slowly into the room. Marlene stood with both hands extended toward the iron door. Warmth touched her fingers, then her wrists. The cabin did not become cozy. Cold remained in the logs, floor, and stone. But the stove had changed from an object into a function. Calvin checked the pipe temperature. Don't load it full until you've stayed with a few small fires, he said. Old stove, old chimney. Learn how it drafts in wind. I'm not sleeping here yet. Good. You sound surprised. I'm revising my assessment of your sense. Write it in your feed sack. At Pine Ridge Market, Marlene finished reconciling September and October. Tessa paid the remaining hours, agreed to the monthly schedule, and introduced her to Joan Avery, who ran the garden supply store from a converted metal building outside Burnsville. Joan had stapled receipts to a calendar. Only the big ones, she said defensively. Marlene looked at Tessa. I warned you, Tessa said. Joan needed 6 hours a month, mostly reconciling vendor accounts and tracking seasonal inventory. The work would not make Marlene comfortable. Combined with Pine Ridge and occasional farm consulting, however, it covered Louise's rent, groceries, gasoline, and a narrow margin for cabin materials. Marlene created a 12-month projection. She calculated conservative income, taxes, health expenses, vehicle maintenance, property taxes, firewood, insurance estimates, and the repairs still required. She did not enter Derek's $38,000 anywhere. The numbers showed that she could survive. They did not yet show that she could move. The cabin needed a safer loft rail, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, basic wiring or an off-grid lighting system, and a way to keep food cold. The outhouse remained legal for occasional use only if maintained, but long-term occupancy raised questions she was not ready to price. Winter access would be on foot. Every bag of groceries would cross that bridge. Marlene stared at the spreadsheet until the cells blurred. Louise set a bowl of vegetable soup beside her. "You've been glaring at that machine for an hour. It started it. What does it say? That living is expensive. I could have saved you an hour." Marlene closed the laptop. "My month is almost up. The room's available another month." "At the same rate?" Louise looked offended. "You think I'm running a charity above my garage?" "No. Good. Same rate. Also, the shower drain is slow. If you fix it, I'll deduct the plumber's estimate." "How slow?" "It thinks before swallowing." Marlene repaired the drain in 40 minutes. Hair and soap had built up around a plastic stopper piece. Louise deducted $75 from the next month's rent and refused to bargain downward. "You're allowed to have skills that benefit you," she said. Marlene wrote the credit under maintenance barter. The farm continued sending small questions. Derek submitted 2 hours one week, none the next, then asked her to explain an equipment depreciation schedule in 15 minutes. She replied with a 2-hour minimum. He found his own answer. Ellen did not call again. Her absence did not feel like punishment. It felt like a door left ajar in cold weather, noticeable, wasteful, and difficult to decide whether to close. Martin reported that no unusual claims had appeared against Raymond's estate. Ordinary deadlines still had to pass. If everything continued normally, distribution could occur before the end of the year. Derek made an offer, Marlene told him, for the tract, $38,000 plus some repairs. Martin was quiet long enough to choose his words. "I don't advise on property value. You can obtain an appraisal if you're considering it." "I'm not." "Then why mention it?" Marlene touched the folded proposal beside her notebook. "Because not considering it takes more effort than I expected. Money tends to create work even when you decline it." That evening, she drove to the cabin with groceries, blankets, and a new smoke alarm. She had not planned to stay after dark. She wanted to test the stove through a longer burn and see how quickly the room lost heat. The first real cold front moved over the ridge before sunset. Wind shook the bare upper branches and drove water mist sideways from the falls. Marlene carried split oak inside, lit a small fire, and placed a kettle on top of the stove. The cabin warmed by degrees. The loft trapped heat better than the ground floor. Drafts entered around the door and one window, adding weather stripping to her list. She heated soup, ate at Raymond's table, and listened to the wind. No one called needing an invoice, a password, or an answer. The quiet was not silence. The waterfall filled every gap. It sounded different after dark, larger because she could not see it. At 9, the outside temperature dropped to 34. The cabin held at 58 near the stove and 47 by the east wall. Habitable with work, not comfortable? She entered both readings. Her phone showed no signal. Derek's proposal lay folded in her coat pocket because she had brought it without admitting why. Marlene unfolded it on the table. $38,000, $5,000 in repairs, a clean exit from the uncertainty she had inherited. She imagined the bridge widened, trees cleared for parking, rental signs at the road, blue lights installed beneath the natural white water. Derek would call it improvement. Guests would call the cabin hidden, though the mountain had never promised secrecy. The kettle began to whistle. Marlene removed it, poured water over tea, and turned Derek's proposal face down. Above the stove, Raymond's notebook rested on the shelf. She opened to the lines she had tried not to memorize. "Last place my sister ever seemed to breathe without permission." Marlene sat until the fire sank low. Then she rose to add one piece of wood and felt her left knee give way. Her hand missed the table. She struck the floor hard enough to send the tea across Derek's proposal. Pain arrived before the sound of her body hitting the floor had finished. It filled the left knee, sharp along the inside and hot beneath the kneecap. Marlene lay on one hip beside the overturned chair, listening to the kettle settle and the waterfall continue as though nothing had happened. The stove door remained closed. One piece of oak burned inside. The tea had spread across Derek's proposal and begun dripping from the table. She tried to straighten her leg. The knee moved, but the pain made her stop. "All right," she said through her teeth. "We're not doing that." Her phone lay on the table. No signal. The flashlight was beside it, the first aid kit in her station wagon half a mile away. Marlene rolled onto her hands and good knee. She used the chair seat to raise herself high enough to sit. The injured leg trembled when her boot touched the floor, but it accepted some weight. Nothing felt displaced. No grinding, no numbness in her foot. She had not broken it. Probably. Probably had become an expensive word. The loft ladder might as well have led to another county. Marlene dragged the rolled mattress down one rung at a time and let it drop. Dust rose. She spread a clean blanket over it, then used the broom handle as a cane to reach the door and retrieve 2 pieces of firewood from the porch. She would not cross the bridge in darkness. Even if she reached the station wagon, the cold, steep trail offered no place to sit safely if the knee failed again. She put 1 piece of oak in the stove and left the other beside it. Derek's proposal had absorbed most of the tea. The ink had blurred around responsible evaluation and hospitality potential. Marlene carried the dripping pages to the basin, then changed her mind and laid them flat near the stove. Throwing them away while angry would be another way of letting him make the decision. She sat on the mattress with her leg elevated on the overturned chair. After 20 minutes, the pain lost its sharp edge and became a heavy pulse. Swelling appeared above the old scar. The cabin cooled whenever the fire dropped. Marlene kept it small, feeding 1 piece at a time, waking at intervals to check the stove and her knee. The floor pressed every hard point in her body through the thin mattress. Once, near 3 in the morning, she opened her eyes without knowing where she was. Thomas's name formed in her mouth. The dark room answered with the faint red line of the stove vent. She had spent 36 years knowing that if she fell, someone slept in the same house. Thomas might have been useless in an emergency before coffee, but he had existed within calling distance. Loneliness was not the absence of noise. It was the absence of another person who would notice if the noise changed. Marlene reached for the broom handle and added wood. At first light, frost silvered the porch and the roof above the repaired chimney. Her knee had swollen enough that her work jeans pulled tightly across it. She heard Juniper before she heard Calvin. The dog's claws clicked over the bridge boards, followed by Calvin calling from the East Bank path. "Marlene, in here?" He appeared in the doorway carrying 2 sample bottles and stopped. The mattress on the floor, the broom beside Marlene, and her elevated leg gave him the answer without explanation. "When?" "Last night." "You stay here?" "I was under the impression you could see the mattress. Hit your head?" "No." "Hip?" "No." "Can you stand?" With bad language. "That's not weight-bearing status. I can put weight on it. I can't trust it." Calvin crouched without touching the knee. "We're getting you out. I need the spring sample collected first." He stared at her. "The line has to flush before the sample," she said. "We already waited the required time. Marlene, the bottle is in your hand." His beard moved as he pressed his lips together. "Fine," he said. "I'll flush the line. Then we leave. Correct order." "You are exhausting." "So I've been told." Calvin collected the sample while Marlene dressed slowly. He found 2 stout poles in the woodshed, cut one to walking stick length, and wrapped the top with cloth tape. He carried her bag and took the outside position on every descent. Marlene crossed the bridge under her own weight, one hand on the rail, the other on the stick. Each step jarred the swollen joint. They stopped 4 times along the trail. Calvin did not offer encouragement. He pointed out routes, waited when she needed to breathe, and kept Juniper from circling her legs. At the turnaround, Marlene leaned against the station wagon. "I can drive." "No." It's my right leg that operates the pedals, and your whole body that nearly fell twice. I did not nearly fall. You performed 2 experimental dips." He put her bag in his truck. The urgent care receptionist handed Marlene a clipboard and asked whether the injury had occurred at home. Marlene looked at the checkbox. "Yes," she said. X-rays showed no fracture. The clinician diagnosed a sprain aggravated by old joint damage and told her to use a hinged brace, ice the knee, and limit steep walking until the swelling resolved. If it remained unstable, she would need an orthopedic evaluation. "How long?" Marlene asked. "Give it 10 days before you test it on uneven ground. I don't have 10 days. The clinician gave her the look medical professionals reserved for people attempting to renegotiate biology. "Then you may end up having more. The brace, visit, and medication cost $186 after insurance." Marlene entered the amount in her notebook while Calvin drove her to Louise's. "What category?" he asked. "Medical. Not cabin? My knee doesn't become real estate because I hurt it there." Louise opened the yellow door and watched Marlene climb from the truck. "What did you do now?" "I fell. Did the limit move?" "Apparently." Louise installed her on the downstairs sofa with ice, soup, and a bell from her nursing years. "I will throw this through a window," Marlene said. "Then I'll know you need something." Calvin left after placing the water sample in the required drop box. At the door, he wrote his number on Louise's calendar. "I'm not an emergency contact," he said. "I'm the man who knows the trail." "Comforting distinction," Louise replied. When Derek called that afternoon, Marlene had already decided not to mention the fall. He heard it anyway. "What's wrong with your voice?" "Nothing. You sound tired." "I slept badly." "At the cabin?" "Yes." "You stayed there alone?" The question carried concern. It also carried satisfaction that evidence had begun cooperating with him. "I tested the stove." "And?" "It works." "Is that where you hurt your knee?" Marlene looked toward the kitchen, where Louise was deliberately making enough noise not to seem as though she was listening. "Who told you?" "You canceled our records meeting. You said medical. I didn't cancel. I offered video. You shouldn't be hiking into remote property with an unstable knee." "Thank you, doctor. I'm serious." "What if you'd fallen near the creek?" "I didn't." "What if the bridge iced? What if you couldn't call anyone?" That question found the dark cabin at 3 a.m. Marlene tightened her grip on the phone. "Are you asking if I'm safe or presenting arguments for your purchase? I'm asking you to be rational. And if rational means selling to you, it means considering it. I have considered it." "Then make a counteroffer." "I don't want more money, Derek. Everybody wants more money. Not for everything." He exhaled. "The proposal can't stay open indefinitely. The farm has capital decisions to make. The farm should make them." "Friday," he said. "After that, I can't promise the same terms. You never promise them. You sent a proposal." He went silent. Marlene almost smiled. He had not expected her to distinguish the words. "Friday," he repeated. She ended the call and wrote, "No" beside the printed proposal. Then she closed the notebook without sending an answer. The injury did not stop her paid work. It changed its shape. Tessa delivered a crate of Pine Ridge Market invoices to Louise's garage apartment and included a bag of oranges. "These are not payment," she said. "They're cosmetically unsuitable inventory. They have leaves attached. Very unsuitable." Joan sent digital statements and one photograph of a receipt stapled to November 17th. Marlene called her. "Did we learn nothing?" "I needed to remember when I bought it. The receipt has a date." "That tiny number?" "Yes, Joan. Commerce anticipated your needs." Calvin brought his bank statements in a proper folder. Marlene created an invoice template, reconciled his deposits, and identified 2 business checks he had forgotten to send. "How does a person forget to send a check?" she asked. "Put it in an envelope. That usually assists. Then put the envelope in a jacket you don't wear for 6 months." She entered his remaining barter hours. After the sill work, chimney cleaning, and bridge repair, Calvin had provided 3 hours more than she had. "I owe you," she said. "You're reconciling through December. At the agreed rate, that leaves 1 hour and 20 minutes after December. Fine. Not fine. Accurate." He took the sheet. "I'll use the hour to move your dresser. I didn't ask. Then I'll use it to stand near the dresser and offer costly advice. I'm not moving yet." "No, but you're measuring." She looked at him. He pointed to the page beneath her hand. She had drawn the loft wall and written the walnut dresser's width beside it. The water retest came back clear. Nora delivered the result by phone and warned that one clean sample did not guarantee permanent safety. Marlene would need to maintain the spring box, keep runoff diverted, and test periodically. "Understood," Marlene said. Nora continued. "Calvin told me about your knee. Calvin has become a rural news service. He was asking whether the old upper access trail could be reopened for emergency use." Marlene sat straighter. "Could it? Not without crossing another owner's land, and there's no recorded right there, so don't plan around it." The answer disappointed her, but she preferred it to false possibility. "What would you plan around?" she asked. "Regular check-ins, a satellite messenger if you can afford one, proper first aid supplies at the cabin, and learning when not to walk a wet trail. I knew that last part. Knowing enjoys company." Ellen arrived at Louise's that evening carrying a folding cane and an expression that made Marlene wish she had hidden the brace. "Derek told me," she said. "Of course he did. He said you fell and spent the night alone. He made it sound worse than it was." "Did he?" Marlene did not answer. Ellen sat across from her. "Why didn't you call me?" "There was no signal." "After." "Because we weren't speaking. That doesn't mean you couldn't call. It generally complicates dialing." Ellen looked down at the cane. "I bought this. The height adjusts. I have a walking stick. This has a rubber foot. Luxury. Please don't make fun of it until you try it." Marlene adjusted the cane, stood, and walked across the room. It was lighter than the stick and steadier on the floor. "Thank you," she said. Ellen's shoulders eased, but only slightly. "Are you taking Derek's offer?" "No. He thinks you'll counter." "I'm not negotiating. Have you told him?" "Not yet." Ellen watched her walk back to the sofa. "He's going to say the fall proves you can't live there. He already did. I'm worried too. You're allowed. What happens if you fall again?" "I improve the plan." "That sounds like one of Dad's answers. Then I'll improve the answer. I keep supplies where I need them. I establish check-ins. I don't walk in bad weather. I buy a satellite messenger when I can. I accept that living alone doesn't mean behaving as if no one else exists." Ellen's eyes filled unexpectedly. Marlene sat. "I don't want you to disappear into those woods," Ellen said. "I disappeared at the farm while standing in the kitchen." The sentence left them both still. Ellen wiped beneath one eye. "I saw you." "No. You saw what I did. You think there's no difference?" "I think I'm finding out." Marlene expected Ellen to defend herself. Instead, she nodded once. "What needs doing while your knee heals?" Ellen asked. There were dozens of answers, and Marlene's first instinct was to offer none. She opened the cabin notebook. "Weather stripping," she said. "Smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, battery lights, 2 food-safe water containers. I have a list and a budget. Give it to me. I'm paying," I assumed. "You'll follow the list?" "Yes. No decorative lanterns." Ellen almost smiled. "No decorative lanterns. And the weather stripping has to match the measurements. I can read measurements. You bought $140 hiking shoes. They were on sale. That makes it worse." Ellen laughed, quiet and surprised. A week later, Marlene returned to the footpath in her knee brace. Calvin carried the supplies. Ellen carried the water containers. Louise remained at the turnaround with a thermos, claiming somebody had to guard the cars from organized rhododendron. The descent took twice as long as before. At the bridge, Marlene paused. Frost lingered in the shaded grooves between the traction cleats. The repaired rail felt firm beneath her hand. "You don't have to prove anything," Ellen said behind her. Marlene looked beyond the waterfall at the cabin on its solid sill, smoke absent from the chimney, but possible now. I know, she said. She crossed slowly, with Calvin ahead and Ellen behind, not carrying her, not deciding for her, simply there if the knee failed. It did not. Ellen installed the first strip of weather stripping upside down. Marlene watched her press the adhesive into the door frame. You want to reconsider that? Ellen stepped back. It's straight. It's designed to compress against the door. It will. The thick side is facing the wall. Ellen looked at the package, then at the strip. Calvin carried the smoke alarms into the cabin. $140 hiking shoes? Marlene nodded. They were on sale, Ellen said. Apparently the instructions were too. Ellen peeled the strip off and began again. Her ears had turned pink, but she was smiling. They spent the morning closing drafts. Ellen fitted foam around the windows under Marlene's direction. Calvin mounted the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, replaced the unsafe loft rail, and built a second handhold beside the ladder. Marlene stayed off her knees and recorded every expense at the table. The spring line produced clear water. The stove drew steadily. Wind found fewer places to enter. By lunch, the cabin held 61 degrees, with a small fire while the outside temperature remained in the low 40s. Marlene wrote both numbers beside the previous test. Ellen leaned over her shoulder. Is that good? It's 6 degrees better. That sounds good. It sounds 6 degrees better. Calvin opened the food container Ellen had packed. Don't ask her to celebrate without a supporting column. Marlene accepted half a turkey sandwich. The brace made her leg hot and awkward, but the knee remained stable. She had learned to turn her whole body rather than pivot, an adjustment so small it embarrassed her that she had resisted similar ones for years. During the afternoon, Calvin mounted a folding solar panel on a simple frame beside the woodshed, where winter sun reached longest. It connected to a portable power station Marlene had bought, used from a man closing his hunting camp. The battery could charge her phone, run LED lights, power her laptop for bookkeeping, and operate a small 12-volt cooler for part of the day. It could not heat the cabin or support fantasies. Marlene preferred equipment that admitted its limits. She had paid $480 after testing it in the seller's garage. The money came from Pine Ridge Market, Joan's garden supply account, and the farm consultation Derek had purchased despite objecting to her minimum. Her savings had stopped shrinking every day. They had not begun growing. Ellen plugged in one of the battery lights. Warm light spread over the table and chestnut walls. It's beautiful, she said. It's a bulb. You're very difficult to impress. I'm impressed that you installed it right side up. Near sunset, they carried tools back toward the turnout. Ellen stayed behind Marlene on the climb without hovering. When Marlene paused to rest, Ellen examined leaves or adjusted her gloves, allowing the stop to remain ordinary. At the road, Louise waited with 3 cups of coffee and an announcement. I've decided I dislike guarding cars, she said. They have no conversation. You talk to them anyway, Calvin said. They were unreceptive. Louise handed Marlene a cup. A man called my house looking for you. Derek? Martin Penland. He says you left your phone in the cabin. Marlene checked her coat pocket. Empty. Ellen offered to go back. No, Marlene said. It'll be there tomorrow. Louise raised an eyebrow. Listen to you. Leaving an object behind without reorganizing the mountain to retrieve it. I'm healing. Martin's message concerned the probate schedule. The creditor period had ended. Raymond's remaining bills, taxes, cremation, and administrative expenses had consumed almost all the cash in the estate, just as expected. After final signatures and recording, the 19-acre tract could be distributed to Marlene. No dispute. No newly discovered account. No relative emerging to challenge her. Just the slow legal conversion of Raymond's neglected responsibility into hers. At Martin's office, he placed a small stack of papers before her and marked where she needed to sign. "What does the estate have left after expenses?" Marlene asked. He checked the final statement. $312.48. She considered the figure. That ought to cover the second water test and part of the chimney cap. Martin smiled. "You may be the first heir I've had who immediately converted her inheritance into chimney mesh. I inherited the chimney too." Once the papers were signed, Martin gave her copies and explained that the recording confirmation would follow. "Raymond kept the taxes paid when he let everything else slide," Marlene said. "He was particular about that property. He was particular about many things and responsible about 7. Martin closed the file. "You miss him." Marlene put on her coat. "That doesn't make him easier." "No." She looked at him. "Thank you for not telling me grief is complicated. I charge by the word." Outside, the sky was clear and painfully blue. Marlene sat in her station wagon with the estate statement on the passenger seat. 19 acres, a weathered cabin, $312.48. She laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. Derek's Friday deadline had passed without an answer. His proposal had not vanished. He sent a shorter message Saturday morning. "Need your decision before Monday. We can't hold funds indefinitely." Marlene typed, "I decline." She did not send it. A text felt too easy to misread as anger, and too easy for him to answer with another number. She still had the farmhouse keys in a small envelope. Returning them would close one practical obligation that had remained open far too long. She drove to the farm on Monday afternoon. The trees had lost nearly all their leaves. Pruned wood lay stacked near the equipment shed, though several cuts on the first winesap row were too close to the trunk. Marlene saw the damage from the driveway and felt her hands tighten on the wheel. Not her orchard. The sentence did not stop her from knowing what would happen to those cuts in wet weather. It merely stopped knowledge from becoming labor. Ellen's car was parked beside Derek's truck. Inside the farmhouse, someone had moved the dining table 6 inches toward the window. The braided rug was gone. Marlene did not ask where. Derek sat at the kitchen table with a laptop and a folder. Ellen stood at the counter, pouring coffee. "I didn't know you were coming," Derek said. "I'm returning the keys." Marlene placed the envelope on the table. He looked at it but did not touch it. "Did you get my message?" "Yes." "And I'm declining the proposal?" Derek leaned back. "You haven't made a counteroffer. I'm not selling." "Marlene, we offered more than the assessed value, reimbursed repairs, and a clean closing. You have no basis to assume you'll do better." "I'm not trying to do better. You're choosing an unheated cabin over financial security. It is heated. You know what I mean. I often do. That's part of our difficulty." Ellen set down the coffee pot. Derek opened the folder. He had printed comparisons for rural properties and vacation rentals. Several featured polished porches, mountain views, paved parking, and nightly rates highlighted in yellow. "The Waterfall changes the economics," he said. "With responsible development, it changes your attention." His mouth tightened. "This isn't personal. You came to my cabin uninvited 3 days after learning there was a waterfall. Because you're making decisions under emotional strain. I was under emotional strain when you gave me 60 days. That was required. No, transfer of the farm was required. The deadline was your decision. We needed control of the property. You had control. We needed possession." The word filled the kitchen. Ellen spoke from the counter. "She gave you possession of 40 years. Derek turned. "What does that mean?" "It means you keep talking as if Marlene occupied the farm. She ran it. Dad ran the farm. Dad made decisions. Marlene made them work. Marlene did not move." Derek looked between them. "We've been through this." "No," Ellen said. "We avoided it. Ellen, you agreed we couldn't create a permanent occupancy right that wasn't in the trust. This isn't about occupancy rights." "Then what is it about?" Ellen gripped the edge of the counter. "Payroll, vendor contracts, equipment records, pruning schedules. Every season Dad was sick. Every time you called from 3 states away because a pump failed or a worker quit. She handled all of it. Derek's face reddened. Nobody said she did nothing. You did, Marlene said. I said you helped Dad. You used the smaller word because it costs less. He closed the folder hard. What do you want me to do? Rewrite the trust? Pay a 40-year invoice the farm can't possibly absorb? Marlene heard panic beneath the anger. The orchard was under pressure. Derek had inherited control without inheriting competence, and every question he paid her to answer reminded him of the difference. I didn't bring an invoice, she said. I brought your keys. Then why are we doing this? Because you made an offer based on the idea that I would panic before you did. Derek pushed back from the table. I was trying to give you an exit. I already exited. To a room over somebody's garage. To land, that is now mine. Ellen looked at her. It recorded? This morning. The fact did not strike like a victory. It landed quietly among the coffee cups and old cabinet doors. Derek's eyes shifted to the window toward the orchard. You think that cabin proves something, he said. No. It shelters me. You're 68 with a bad knee, half a mile from a road. Yes, what happens when you can't manage it? I change what I'm doing. I ask for help. I sell if I choose. What I don't do is hand it to you because uncertainty makes you excited. He looked wounded then, and for a moment Marlene saw the adult son who had lost his father and been handed a farm whose hidden machinery was a woman he had ordered away. The recognition did not require her to surrender. Derek touched the envelope of keys. The offer's withdrawn. Good. You don't have to sound relieved. I don't have to sound anything. She turned toward the mudroom. Ellen followed her onto the back porch. Wait. Cold wind moved across the bare orchard. Marlene zipped her raincoat. Ellen stopped beside the porch rail. I should have said that before. Yes. I knew what you did. I told myself everybody knew. So I didn't have to be the one who said it. Marlene looked at her. I was afraid if I opposed Derek, I'd lose my share of the farm, or lose him, or find out Dad arranged everything that way because he never saw you the way I thought he did. Thomas loved me. I know. He also accepted an arrangement that protected everything except me. Both can be true. Ellen's eyes filled, but she did not look away. I'm sorry, she said. Not because Derek handled it badly, because I let him erase you while I stood there. This apology did not ask Marlene to deny the injury. She nodded once. Thank you for saying it honestly. Ellen wiped her cheek. Can I still help with the move? The move? Calvin says the dresser is going to require pulleys, a cart, and profanity. He's made a diagram. Calvin talks too much. So is that a yes? Marlene looked through the kitchen window. Derek sat alone at the table, one hand resting on the envelope that contained the keys. It's a yes to moving the dresser, she said. Don't turn it into more than it is. I won't. That would be new. Ellen gave a small, embarrassed smile. I'm trying to improve. Back at Louise's, boxes covered the garage apartment. The room had slowly divided into what would fit in the cabin, what would go into storage, and what had survived 40 years without earning the right to follow her. Marlene packed Thomas's apple mug in newspaper. She held his field jacket for a long time before placing it in the box with her winter clothes. The walnut dresser stood beneath the window, waiting for Calvin's diagram. On the wall calendar, Marlene had circled the first Saturday in December. The forecast called for a hard freeze the following night. One day to move what mattered. One night to discover whether the cabin could keep her. The dresser did not fit through the cabin door. Calvin measured it again as if the numbers might apologize. It fit on the diagram, Ellen said. The diagram didn't include that iron latch, Calvin replied. Marlene stood on the porch in her knee brace while Louise supervised from the bridge. Take the door off, Marlene said. Calvin looked at the hinges. Pins are rusted. You brought penetrating oil. I did. And a hammer. I resent your tone. You drew a diagram. Behind them, Nora Bell approached along the East Bank path, carrying 2 dresser drawers filled with folded towels. "What are we learning?" "Calvin measures imaginary doorways," Ellen said. Nora set down the drawers. Everybody needs a winter hobby. They had begun at 8 that morning with the temperature at 31 degrees and dropping. Marlene's station wagon, Ellen's car, and Calvin's truck filled the turnaround. Louise had brought her own vehicle despite being told there was nowhere to put it, then parked half on the gravel and announced that anyone who objected could relocate the mountain. The first loads went in easily: clothes, bedding, food, bookkeeping files, Thomas's field jacket, the apple mug, kitchen supplies, and a wooden crate of tools. Calvin used a 2-wheeled game cart for the heavier boxes. Nora carried more than anyone while insisting survey equipment was worse. Marlene carried what her knee allowed. No one tried to take every load from her. No one praised her for walking the trail. When she stopped, they stopped. When she said she could manage, they believed her until the ground suggested otherwise. The walnut dresser, stripped of its drawers, had crossed the bridge on the cart under 4 sets of hands and a continuous argument about balance. Now it stood on the porch, 3/4 of an inch too wide at the latch. Calvin removed the door. The dresser passed through. "According to plan," he said. "Revise the diagram," Marlene told him. Getting it into the loft required the pulley arrangement Calvin had drawn. He braced a temporary crossbar above the open loft edge, wrapped the dresser in moving blankets, and raised it while Nora and Ellen guided from below. Marlene watched the rope angle and called a stop when the bottom corner swung too close to the stovepipe. They corrected, lifted again, and eased the dresser onto the loft floor. Calvin climbed after it and slid it against the wall Marlene had measured. "Level enough," he called. "It has 4 feet," Marlene said. "Use them." The cabin filled by degrees, her mother's dresser beneath the low roof, her account books on Raymond's chestnut shelves, Thomas's mug beside the enamel basin, her brown boots by the door, and teal raincoat on a peg Calvin installed without putting the labor on his barter sheet. Marlene noticed. She did not object. Tessa had sent a pot of beef stew from Pine Ridge Market. Joan had contributed a loaf of bread and a note attached with a paperclip instead of a staple. They ate at Raymond's table in shifts because 5 people in Juniper exceeded the cabin's comfortable capacity. Louise sat nearest the stove. "This place has ambiance." "It has insufficient chairs," Nora said from the window ledge. "That's ambiance with a seating problem." Ellen opened the cooler and handed around bottles of water. Calvin lifted his bowl. "To the roof not leaking." "The spring testing clear," Nora added. "The dresser surviving your plan," Ellen said. Marlene looked around the table. "To everybody going home before dark." Louise clicked her spoon against the bowl in agreement. They laughed, but they did leave before the path disappeared into evening. Calvin carried out the empty moving blankets. Nora checked the bridge for frost. Louise left a container of stew on the counter and extracted a promise that Marlene would use the satellite messenger she had bought secondhand if the knee became unstable. Ellen lingered on the porch. The air smelled of wood smoke and cold water. Across the creek, bare branches showed black against the fading sky. "Are you scared?" Ellen asked. "Yes." The answer seemed to surprise her. "You don't act scared. I made 6 pages of preparations. That is how you act scared. It has served me well." Ellen put her hands into her coat pockets. "You can still come back to Louise's tonight." "I know. Or stay with me." Marlene looked at her. "I'm not saying you can't do this," Ellen said quickly. "I'm saying you have somewhere to go if you choose." The offer contained no demand that Marlene prove anything, and no assumption that accepting once would transfer control. "Thank you," she said. "I'm staying." Ellen nodded. At the top of the East Bank path, she turned back. "Can I call tomorrow?" "Yes." "What time?" "After 8." Ellen smiled. "That's specific? I'll be checking the spring line at 7. "Of course you will." Marlene watched until Ellen crossed the bridge and disappeared behind the falling water. Then the cabin belonged entirely to its sounds. The iron stove ticked as it heated. Wind moved over the roof. The spring pump knocked twice when pressure settled in the line. Beneath all of it, the waterfall held its deep, constant note. Marlene closed the shutters, checked the smoke alarm, tested the carbon monoxide detector, and set the satellite messenger beside her bed. She entered the stove temperature and outside, reading in her notebook. 28 degrees and falling. Her bookkeeping files fit beneath the table. The portable power station showed 86% charge. She plugged in one battery light and the 12-volt cooler, then confirmed the projected run time. The ordinary tasks steadied her. At 9, the cabin held 59 degrees near the table and 52 by the east wall. The repaired sill admitted no draft. Frost spread over the lower window corners, but the glass remained dry. Marlene climbed the loft ladder slowly, favoring her left knee. At the top, she looked down into the one-room cabin. Small did not mean temporary. She unpacked Thomas's field jacket and hung it from a wooden peg beside the dresser. For several minutes, she stood with one hand resting on its shoulder. "I kept the mug," she told him. The waterfall answered. She changed into flannel pajamas, then climbed down to tend the stove before sleeping. On the chestnut shelf, Raymond's notebook waited inside its plastic bag. Marlene removed it and read the last repair entry. October 3rd. 2 roof shakes gone. Temporary patch. His work had ended in the middle, as most work did. The cabin had not been a message arranged for her. Raymond had not known when he paid the last tax bill that she would inherit the tract, need a place to live, or find his measurements. He had simply kept something from disappearing while he was able. Marlene turned to the unused final page. She did not write in it. Instead, she placed a new notebook beside his and wrote December 5th at the top. Moved in. 24 degrees outside. Roof dry. Spring running. East sill sound. After a moment, she added, "Needed help." She closed the notebook before the sentence could become an apology. The hard freeze reached the hollow after midnight. Marlene woke when the fire dropped and the cabin temperature fell below 50. Her knee had stiffened, but it supported her. She descended, added 2 pieces of oak, and checked the pump. The handle resisted. She worked it once, then stopped. The exposed section near the back wall might have begun freezing. Calvin had insulated it, but insulation slowed cold. It did not negotiate with it. Marlene opened the lower cabinet, wrapped a warm towel around the pipe, and waited. 10 minutes later, the pump produced a narrow stream, then clear, running water. She filled both containers and left the cabinet door open so heat could reach the line. The repair was not elegant. It worked. At dawn, the outdoor thermometer read 18 degrees. The cabin remained at 56. Ice rimmed the creek edges, though the waterfall continued moving white and loud through the frozen hollow. Marlene sent 3 words through the satellite messenger: warm, water running. Replies arrived from Calvin and Louise within minutes. Ellen called at 8:03. "You waited 3 minutes," Marlene said. "I was trying to seem relaxed. You failed. How was the night?" The pipe tried to freeze. It reconsidered. "You slept?" "Some. Are you staying?" Marlene looked at the stove, the dry stone chimney, and the apple mug on the counter. "Yes." Ellen was quiet. Then she said, "Good. No warning. No congratulations large enough to become ownership. Just good." Marlene spent the first weeks of winter learning what the cabin required. She brushed frost from the bridge before crossing. She hauled groceries in smaller loads. She kept a second walking stick on the west bank in case she arrived without one. After a heavy rain, she checked the uphill drainage before checking anything inside. The waterfall was never converted into income. It was not fenced for visitors, advertised, or lit from below. It changed with the weather and asked only that she respect the ground around it. Her money came from work. On Mondays, she sat in Pine Ridge Market's cramped office, while Tessa argued with bread vendors. Twice a month, she drove to Joan's garden supply store and removed receipts from the calendar. She maintained Calvin's sawmill ledger from the cabin table, charging her laptop from the portable battery. The farm purchased 3 additional consulting sessions, everyone billed at her stated rate. Derek did not discuss the land again. His messages became brief and professional. Once, after Marlene identified an incorrect insurance classification that would have cost the farm money, he replied, "Thank you." She stared at the words longer than they deserved, then entered the paid hour and closed the file. The farm learned to function without access to her at all times. Marlene learned that being needed at scheduled hours did not feel like being owned. Ellen visited every other Sunday, calling first. She brought groceries when asked, and nothing when she wasn't. She stopped offering opinions about where furniture should go. Once she arrived with the blue bedroom curtains Marlene had left at the farmhouse. "I thought you might want them," she said. Marlene touched the fabric. "I left those for you." "I know. But I think you left them because taking them would have looked angry." "That sounds possible." "I don't want things you abandoned to protect my feelings." Marlene hung the curtains over the cabin's 2 small windows. They were too long. Ellen hemmed them badly, and Marlene made her do the second one again. Their relationship did not become what it had been. What it had been depended too much on Marlene answering every call, carrying every emergency, and expecting gratitude to arrive without being requested. What grew in its place was smaller and more honest. Calvin came by when weather allowed, sometimes with juniper and sometimes with a repair question that became coffee. Nora marked the spring test date on Marlene's calendar and accepted stew in exchange for helping split a stubborn round of oak. Louise complained that the cabin's chairs were hostile and brought a cushion she claimed had no sentimental value. No one needed Marlene to earn her place in the room before sitting down. Near the end of January, rain fell warm and heavy for 2 days. The waterfall swelled until its spray reached the bridge. Marlene waited for the creek to drop before crossing, then walked to the west bank on a pale morning. She stood where the footpath first revealed the falls. Wet rhododendron leaves crowded the view. Marlene parted them with one hand and rested the other on the repaired rail. Beyond the bright water, the cabin stood on the higher east bank beneath bare winter branches. Smoke rose from its chimney. Blue curtains showed faintly through one window. The dark chestnut logs remained weathered. The porch still sagged a little, and more work waited for spring. Nothing about it resembled a fortune. Marlene looked until she felt the old question return. Not Raymond. What did you do? But what would she do now that no one else could decide what her life was worth? Her left knee ached in the cold. She shifted her weight, turned back across the bridge, and walked toward the smoke from her own chimney.